What up, everybody? We're back for the afternoon session of Dekalb County GOP versus Raffensperger, where we are in the day one afternoon session of the efforts by the Dekalb County GOP to try and secure up the 2024 election. If you missed this morning, what you missed was that we had the chairwoman from the Dekalb County GOP come in there and testify about her learning about the issues with respect to the fact that, well, in their estimation, that there is virtually no security whatsoever, that everyone has access to the encryption key password, and thereby can just go in there and do whatever they want. And worse yet, that there be no traceability. We also heard from expert witness by the name of Clay Preek, who came in there and was testifying that demonstrated how easy it is to hack and get the encryption key password from any of these counties, that they have different passwords in each county, and it takes like 60 seconds for anyone who knows what they're doing to actually get their hands on it. And once they get their hands on it, if they manipulated the system, manipulated votes, put in new algorithms, you wouldn't even know. You wouldn't even know about it. And he recommended that he said you can't really fix all this before November, but you can implement logging that anytime anyone makes any change, it would automatically pop up. And at least that way, if someone tried playing around, we would know about it and be able to remedy it and potentially track down the perpetrator and who was at fault for instituting new algorithms or changes to the vote and things of that nature. On cross-examination, he held up really well. He was like, every question the state's attorney was asking on cross seemed to just be like a joke. Like, you can't prove that there was actually any sort of fraud that happened. I mean, it was just nothing. It was really, he was swatting him left and right. And he said, yeah, you couldn't prove it because that's how poor your system is, that you're not logging anything. So how no one could prove it. But if it happened 4,000 times, if I did it, you wouldn't know it, would you? You wouldn't want to put your money in a bank like that. And he was really just lethal. Anyway, we're going to pop back in there. It started at 1:15. I'm probably going to play it at 1 1/4 speed until we catch up. So I'm going to pop back in there and resume and catch up there. I'm not sure how far behind I am now. It looks like that he's still in there cross-examining him. So I'm going to try and play that 1 1/4 speed so we could try catching up to this whole thing. They started roughly 20 minutes ago or so. So I'm gonna just pop in there, and I try and keep my commentary as limited as possible. I want to make sure that I let the action speak for itself. What I do basically is I provide narration so that you, who are not an attorney, can hopefully better understand and appreciate the significance and magnitude of what's being testified about, or questions, about legal terms and things of that nature. And I try and keep myself limited, while at the same time feeling confident that even someone who has absolutely no experience with the law can understand what is happening there, and whether attorneys are doing a good job or not. With that, let's get into it. Let's do it. Let's get started. Let's catch up. Sorry, Mr. Celebration.
And before we go back on the record, did y'all get a chance to talk about the other 7 or however many authentication experts or witnesses? Okay.
Thank you so much, Sherry. I'm going to be eating while this happens, so I didn't get a chance to eat. So
great.
We'll see where it takes us. Okay, good. I just want to continue to flag that for everybody. Got it.
And I have a memo on authentication.
Well, head it at me now. I always do for a refresh.
Yep. Say what?
All right, do we have a witness?
He's coming.
Okay. Got it.
Let's just move along here.
Agreement on. I know you've worked in the security world for a long time, and Mr. McDougall had asked you some questions about, is the system secure or not?
This, by the way,
you'd agree that security
is a matter of cross-examination.
Something's not secure or insecure. It's kind of more secure or less secure, right?
Correct.
Okay. And part of understanding the security of any particular system involves looking
He's
at
an expert
the
witness,
cybersecurity components, right?
Yes.
And it involves looking at the physical security of those components, right?
True.
And in determining how a system functions, you'd agree that sometimes usability for users can be.
And just a note for you, if you come and go, always check when I'm live streaming a trial, whenever I'm live streaming a trial, always check the banner. I try to keep that updated as to who's on the stand, whose witness it is it direct, redirect, cross, whatever, and also their name and background. So this way, instead of asking the audience, you'll just be easily informed on that. So try to take note of checking out the Chiron or the banner I'm running below at all times when I'm live streaming a trial.
Kind of at war with security at some level, right?
In certain aspects, but in system design, if you create the system appropriately, usability is already taken into an account. So security never really hampers anything.
And part of the EAC's review of a voting system includes its usability both for voters and for poll workers, right?
But we're talking about critical infrastructure, the thing that decides who you put in office, who you vote to protect you as sheriff, how you fund your parks. That's critical. Those are high value systems. You don't put security in the back end of it and say that usability is going to be paramount over security.
Well, my question wasn't which was paramount, just that part of the EAC's review of a voting system includes its usability, right?
Any system that gets evaluated is usability, security, and all that, not just in the technical world, in any process or procedure.
And there are some times where you may make a choice that makes a system more secure but less usable, right?
Yes, but what we're talking about as far as these systems doesn't make it less usable. I would care to sit down with any of the vendors and talk that technical conversation.
And so when we're talking about voting systems, just to come back to the main point, we're not talking about whether a system is, the Dominion system, for example, is secure or insecure. We're talking about if it's more secure or less secure, right?
No, it's not secure at all.
So in your view, it's not an issue of degrees of security as to the Dominion system. It is just straight up insecure.
Yes, as I've stated before, your home computer is more secure. But I don't know about your work. When as you're an attorney, I often find that attorneys don't even use hard disk encryption on their laptops, which is another issue I have. But that's a side note. Please do it if you don't. Your clients will appreciate it.
So, but again, when we're looking at this, what methodology did you use to reach the conclusion that the Dominion system is insecure, not just less secure than you would like it?
The primary factor are the keys stored the way they are. Then within the operating system and the outdated applications, when I literally say there are hundreds of vulnerabilities, there are hundreds of vulnerabilities. And I've done this analysis on different machines. And for example, ES&S in my home state of Alabama, just between the operating system and the database server, 330 something vulnerabilities. And that's a conservative estimate. There's other things about your transport protocols, the SSL version being used, all those other things. There are literally hundreds of vulnerabilities.
And you'd agree there are many vulnerabilities from kind of any election system a jurisdiction chooses, right?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the data that you looked at. I just want to make sure I understand the pieces that you downloaded from the website.
None of that has anything to do with the fact that he said, so you should be logging what steps people are taking in there, making that public so we can know what that is, right? I mean, okay, if any system could be attacked, shouldn't you want to know when it was and what the nature of the attack was? Doesn't that make sense? Like they should leave a footprint? That most people who are not the top hackers in the world should at least be leaving a footprint? Doesn't that make a little bit of sense? So some 16-year-old doesn't come in there and tear apart your election?
From Voter GA. You mentioned those were SQL files. Was it just the databases or was it the entire election project that you downloaded?
They had other elements in it. They have ballot images in it, TIFF files, and there are other components. There was the package info XML, which allows, because with the SHA file of that, I was able to check timestamps of the other files to know that they hadn't been tampered with. Because if the XML has not been tampered with, it had the timestamps of the files for some of the stuff. There are multiple things.
But the pieces that you were analyzing were only the databases, not those other components. Is that right?
I looked at them. I have analyzed the TIFF files because I've done calculations on how much it takes to transfer the image files and how some counties in Georgia don't do it to the next day, which is an improper procedure. It's different even from what is called for by the vendor. And so anyway, the person who asked me about that, I told them they were given inaccurate information, and I calculated everything out from the USB bus speed, which is the wires that allow the transfer, the type of compact flash, and I use the very lowest possible rate. So I've looked at several things like that.
Okay, but for your testimony today, you're relying on your review of the databases, not those other components.
Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned the hash values of those. Did the Dominion software generate a hash value for those databases that you relied on, or did the initial hash value come from somewhere else?
There are SHA files in those folders with the files.
And it's your understanding that those SHA hash files were generated by the election management system to travel along with the databases?
Yes, and your technical data package is reference to that. It's part of the system check that they do when they get it. So they ensure that, hey, this is coming from where I think it's from, and then they decrypt the file. Because on the compact in Georgia, since they're Dominion, they use compact flash. And on those tabulars, when the compact flash gets inserted, there's that check, and then it moves the files, and then it decrypts it. And that's how it knows it's legitimate. That's why if you have those keys, you can put illegitimate data in it to include ballot images, the CVR, and you can make it seem legitimate, and the system will take it as valid votes when it should not.
And so then before you did your analysis of the databases, you ran your own hash value and compared it to the one that was in the technical package. Is
The
that
very
right?
first thing I do when I get files is to create the hash.
And those matched, right?
Yes,
Now, you mentioned too, I believe, and I may not have heard this right, you loaded the files into, I believe you said a Dominion system?
yes.
And what Dominion system was that?
That was from Mesa, Colorado.
Did you have access to the Dominion system from Coffee County, Georgia?
No, I did not.
And so you loaded the Georgia files into the Mesa, Colorado file. Do you know what version of Dominion's software is used in Mesa, Colorado?
Yes,
And what is it?
it's 5.10, but the SQL server is the same version.
And so the demonstration you did for the court earlier, you were in a Microsoft SQL suite of some sort to look at the
Studio
databases.
Manager.
Studio Manager, thank you. But you performed your analysis in the Dominion system, or did you perform your analysis in the SQL system?
The SQL system is in the Dominion system. The Dominion system runs a SQL server, 2016. And in that server is where the databases get loaded. In different areas, in different states, you'll see old databases, you'll see new databases. It all depends on how the county or state runs their elections and how they preserve their data.
But just so we're clear for the record, in terms of your analysis, did you use the SQL database functions of the Dominion system from Mesa
Yes,
to conduct your analysis?
it's the same database server. This is basic software deployment development. It's version controlled. It's the same. The SQL server is the same.
Certainly. You also mentioned, I believe in your testimony, you had some database experts who helped you. Who were those individuals?
I'm not going to disclose that.
Those individuals assisted you in your analysis of these databases in Georgia?
No, not the Georgia databases. It's this, but again, it's the same database structure, the same stored procedures.
And just so I'm clear, the individuals you referenced who were database experts who helped you were not involved in the review of the Georgia databases you're testifying about today?
That's correct.
Thank you. Now let's talk a little bit about things you're not offering opinions about. I believe you said you're not a lawyer. You're not offering opinions on the legal compliance aspects of Georgia's voting system, right?
No,
And you're not offering opinions about the overall security of the system because you haven't looked at all the different components of how Georgia handles its election processes, right?
if the system itself is bad, and again, if you're relying on physical security, the other processes are irrelevant.
Yep. This guy's eating him
So
for
it's your
lunch.
belief then that any other element of the system does not matter from a security perspective.
Of course not.
If the vulnerabilities you've identified exist.
I will tell you, as I told a county commissioner in Colorado, when he told me all the steps he did, and I told him, you served your community well because everything he did, but then I put my hand on his shoulder and said, but all of it's irrelevant because the system is flawed and has no security, no integrity whatsoever.
Was that also a Dominion system you were referring to?
Yes, it was.
And you did not offer an opinion at all about the degree of risk.
How did Fox
because you
lose to
concluded
Dominion?
The system is just insecure, right?
That is correct. If you would like a risk analysis and assessment, I would be glad to do it for the whole state of Georgia. I would ask if you have the program. If you do not have a risk analysis assessment program and work, I can do it. I helped design the one that the Missile Defense Agency uses several years back, and Health and Human Services as well.
And you don't have any specialized knowledge or experience about the administration of elections separate from the voting systems. Is that right?
The way the voting system test labs function is they set up the different scenarios, specifically if it's a state certification, which is different because Georgia did follow federal. So they run it through the whole gambit. So they have to set the components up and the different configurations that are listed in the technical data package. They run an election to include conduct an LNA test, and then they run sample ballots through. And like a regular election.
And you participated in those processes?
Yeah, I've observed them, and in certain security functions, I would get to participate in them because we would look at things, especially when a vendor would try to connect something to the internet and have a firewall that would get inundated within a minute. But yes,
And it's your understanding that Georgia Dominion equipment is not connected to the internet, right?
that's incorrect.
So you believe Dominion voting system components in Georgia are connected?
Some unrelated Dominion documentation, I can specifically tell you that there is connection.
Which county in Georgia was there a connection to the internet of Dominion equipment?
It would be Gwinnett, if I'm remembering correctly. There were several states involved.
And which time period are you referring to?
This was 2020
Before or after the election?
during the election.
And you've never participated in the training
Whoa!
of poll workers for an election, right?
No, I've talked to them in my home state because the training is often done by the vendors, the majority, and they ask me questions because they found flaws in the systems.
But you don't know who conducts poll worker training in Georgia, right?
No, not poll
No
workers
one
in Georgia.
cares.
Now, I understand that you don't believe physical security matters in this context.
I did not say it doesn't matter.
Okay.
I'd say you cannot rely on it solely.
This is one of those times you start feeling frustrated that the law doesn't have objections stupid.
And you're aware that there are state election board rules regarding physical security, correct?
True. Again, bad guys don't follow rules.
And do some of those rules prohibit connecting Dominion equipment to the internet?
I am going to get away from using the term internet. I'm going to say network connectivity. I've noticed that many states violate their network connectivity. Their law says no network connectivity anyway. Local area network still increases your attack vectors by 1,000-fold. For example, the switches, are they solely for that? Or are they connected to any other part of the county? It's been the case. A lot of counties don't want to provide that information. In Arizona, they wouldn't provide that data. This is that digital evidence that would show that they have outbound connections and not necessarily the internet. Some people will say it's a secure VPN if you're in Wisconsin or Arizona, which is irrelevant because VPNs can be had as well.
This is a witness who knows a trap when it's coming. He's like, because you're going to say, you see, it's not attached to the internet, and since it's not attached to the internet, it's fine. He's like, no. It's attached to other systems, and they have leaks, and that's all you need.
So it's fair to say states have a variety of practices involving how they handle network connectivity.
Yes.
Do you know if the SEB rules in Georgia require secure physical storage of equipment?
Objection.
Yes, I believe they do.
And do you know if those rules require limited access of who can access the equipment?
I don't know all the details on that, but again, any logging, access to those systems, any of the security seal tape logs, all that should be publicly available. For example, my company, when the federal government comes in and inspects us, there's an agency called DCSA, Defense Counterintelligence Service Agency. They come in and audit us. We provide everything to them, to include our corporate information, because it's in our corporate building. That's why they have authority over us. Why? Because we're in contract with the federal government. So every access log, everybody that badges in, and I work in a closed area, classified area, all that stuff's publicly available to them. And anyone, as far as the county, should be able to look at that. There's nothing classified about it.
And in preparing your testimony today, you didn't consider the SEB rules related to voting equipment. Is that correct?
Again, when you're talking about systems that are this bad, it's a minor point on what the rules are.
So that would be a yes. You didn't consider that?
No.
Okay. Let me ask a couple questions about your illustrative examples that you played earlier. So the first one we talked about the password, and then you were able to decrypt and obtain the password using the decryption tool and show where the password was the same as it had previously been. Do you recall that?
The very first video was actually a hash of the DB Corp 08 exclamation point. Yes.
Yes, but that showed where the password was similar to what it had been in the past. In other
It was the
contexts.
exact same thing. It's the same thing I saw in the labs back in 2008, 9, 10.
Do you know if the full database and those administrative account records exist on every component of the system or only on the EMS?
For the database server,
Yes.
there's an SQL lot database that goes onto the tabulators. I have not seen detailed system logs from the tabulators in Georgia. But I would find that they are not logging just like the EMS. But specifically, we were talking about the database that resides on the EMS. That's what those files. They were the normal election management database, not the SQL versions that run on the tabulators.
Right. And just so we're all clear on the different pieces, the part we were looking at on the videos was the election management server that stays at the county office, not the other components of the system that are distributed on election day, right?
That's correct. But with those keys, that's easily manipulated. Like I said, I can decrypt the configuration files. The tabulator will assume that they're legitimate, and then whatever configuration I put on the machine, decrypt will run the configuration files.
One of the other videos you showed a modification of votes that you did by running some script within the database. Do you recall
Yes.
that? And the manipulation that you showed there occurred in this example after the election was over, right?
That's because that's the way my demo went. This could easily be put on beforehand. And if you want to talk about beforehand, we could talk about supply chain management, and I could tell you some of the atrocious stuff I've seen, the technical data packages as far as where they get their parts.
But for the specific video you showed, in that situation, if that manipulation were to occur, we would still have the paper ballots to go back and could count those, correct?
Are you going to hand count the paper ballots? Because here's the thing that I've noticed. Even if like the state of Florida, which has, they say they do a hand count, but they use an automated system. It's another machine. Anybody that knows anything about system testing knows you will not use the same device or the same type of device. You will use a totally different method. And two, it's not independent because it has to use a ballot definition. So you've got your other third-party verifying app talking to the vendor. So it's not actually what we refer to as IVMV, independent verification and validation. So if you're not hand counting them, that's irrelevant. And I might add, I think there's a county in Georgia that's not obeying the court by providing the paper ballots to someone who requested them and won their case.
Fatality.
So just so I understand then, it's your view that hand counting of ballots is the only way to actually accurately tabulate an election?
That is not what I said.
Okay.
I said when you verify it, you do it by a separate method. If you're going to audit something and do that, that's the way you perform the test. And that's the way you can do it. I have personally went through hand counting class and observed it. And especially from my major in computer science is on system design. And so you look at system and processes, and I will state I'm pretty good at it because I do process improvement, and that's when I've gotten financial rewards from my companies. And what I would tell you as far as that is that in the process, it's got to be scalable, and you have to be able to adapt it because each county, just like each county in Georgia, is different. Telfair is a lot smaller than Dekalb or Fulton County, correct? Therefore, it'll be a different type of a method. The main thing you want is the process to be solid in its performance, to be auditable, and that's what can be done, and it can be done accurate. And the training I went through, we actually had a ballot with 25 races on it.
And you'd agree that using a risk limiting audit post-election is a good practice, right?
Only if the risk limiting audit is a valid audit. And it does not. What I will tell you in every state or county that I've evaluated the risk logic, the risk limiting audit, it's been ineffective. For a point of reference, St. Charles County, Missouri, stood there. They're a county official and everything. Oh, we're 100% correct on audit. 100%. Just up, down. Sat down with pencil and paper, did the math. They did 0.004% of the votes cast in that. So what does that mean? I have a 99.996% of not getting caught. It's ineffective. You want your audit to be statistically significant to give you the comfort of trust that it's supposed to be. I have yet to see a risk limiting audit that does that.
So just so I understand then, it's your testimony that a risk limiting audit could be used to verify results of an election, but the ones you've seen like used in Georgia do not?
I would not use a risk limiting audit to verify. I would use a separate, totally different counting method, complete and in its entirety. Because my observations, and not necessarily in Georgia, but in other states, I've seen more things happen during primaries and local elections. And again, counties run the election.
Now, when you were at Pro V&V, you conducted a security review of the Dominion 5.0 system, right?
Yes, I did several different vendors with them.
Do you recall if encryption keys were stored in clear text on that system?
From 2000.
Now he's walking into a little bit of a dangerous area here. While his testimony is phenomenal, he is walking into a dangerous area. If you make it sound as if it's hopeless to try and have a secure election, then you're not encouraging the judge to take steps to help you, because what this lawyer is going to say is whatever we do, they're going to claim is not good enough. So let's do nothing. So you sort of want to, if you want to encourage the judge to go along with what you're saying, you have to build confidence from the court's perspective that this is actually going to be doing something. Otherwise, why do anything? Why take the politically damaging route of saying, I'm going to make you do something if you feel like it's not accomplishing anything? So it is important for him to sort of lay out there that it's not like it's utterly hopeless. There are ways that you can help remedy this. And that's what I liked about the suggestion that he gave earlier. But you can't make it sound as if like it's, no matter what you do, it's going to be an utter failure here. And he's getting a little dangerously close to that from my taste. So I hope that he basically, can inspire confidence that these remedial measures can actually be effective.
They at Wiley Labs, where Jack Cobb, the owner of ProVNB, worked as the supervisor lead, I have not been able to do security testing to the realm that they should have been. So they were never, ever checked. Here's the thing. The labs probably never look at them. I stated the way I've stated before. I felt like I had a choker chain on me from day one in those labs. They do not test these systems to the appropriate level they should be. What they do is the lab will spend a week getting the big tabulators, like for ES&S, the 850, the DS850, big monster machine that they have to spend a week to configure to get it to pass the certification test. Or you talk about the ICCs. The labs will spend more time getting them to pass certification on that portion than they do on security testing.
So your testimony then is, while you conducted some testing on the Dominion 5.0 system, you don't know if the encryption keys were stored in plain text because you never looked.
I would be allowed to have like 1, 2, maybe 3 tests, because you have to do up a test, right? In basic system development, you have use cases and your requirements, and that's how you develop the system. Then you go to testing. And in the test, there's a portion that would be security. And so I would write up my test cases. Here's the thing I would tell you. In earlier Dominion systems, like 4.14 or whatever, I've done several of them, I would do a test, it would fail. I would want to redo the test in the new version, and I would be told, no, you've already done it. And I'd say, but it failed. They go, no, do something different. Again, why I stopped, I got tired of the rubber stamping, and it was typical federal agency type stuff for the EAC. I just boom, boom, boom. No matter what I put in my internal security report to the lab, they always got certified, whether by state secretary of state or by the EAC.
So it's not your testimony that the lab was doing something inconsistent with the EAC. It just wasn't doing as much as you thought needed to be done to test the security of the system, right?
I'm not good. Well, because you'll pull me to hearsay. I would tell you that where states are supposed to be, just like in Georgia, where the Secretary of State has final say, even though it's supposed to be federally certified. When it came to the labs, they would say, well, it's got to go through a federal lab, so we got to do all the tests, but it's state certification, so we don't care. So are you going to allow that? I can tell you who said it, and the multiple times he said it.
Now, you are aware that the federal CISA, Center for, I can't remember all the acronyms.
CISA, yes, I'm very familiar. I've talked to several of them. Southeast region.
So CISA is a federal agency involving infrastructure security. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah.
Okay. And you're aware they reviewed Dr. Halderman's report in the Curling case, right?
Yes.
And they issued recommendations around security practices for Dominion voting systems after reviewing that report, right?
Yes.
And I think we said earlier the encryption key issue was contained in Dr. Halderman's report, right?
What you're trying to infer is out of the 8 things that they listed were very limited in scope, didn't cover half of what Dr. Halderman covered. What I would tell you is I know, because I talked to the Southeast region, Georgia falls in the same area as Alabama, for many years. See, I attend forensic.
The lawyer was trying to ask him and say, look, everything you're talking about came from Halderman, and Halderman took care of those problems. And the witness saw where he was going. And that's why he's like, they solved a tiny fraction of the problems that were identified in the Halderman report.
Conferences, usually in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, because of the environment, right? Can't blame me. So as I attend that, they had 1 representative for a year. There are 3 gentlemen now that handle the Southeast region. So when you look at that, and CISA is also responsible for providing recommendations to industry within those regions, to the municipal governments, for example, city and county infrastructure. If you don't want, as Fulton County got hacked and everything went down, if you don't want that, you're supposed to consult with them. And some of their people are pretty good. What I will tell you is their evaluation of Dr. Halderman's report was probably very limited and very rushed to put something out to the public because his report was going to be public.
And so you'd agree with me then that the encryption key issues you're flagging in this case were not part of CISA's recommendations after reviewing Dr. Halderman's report, right?
We missed a lot of stuff.
But that CISA made no recommendations about encryption keys after reviewing Dr. Halderman's report, right?
That's true. It wasn't in the report.
I got just a moment, Your Honor. Just a couple more questions. I asked you earlier about the 2024 election results, or whether people could trust those results. Is it your testimony that Georgia voters can't trust the results of the 2022 general election held in Georgia?
I would say yes.
Is it your testimony that Georgia voters can't trust the 2024 general primary results held in Georgia?
Considering the state of these systems, yes.
That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Hey, redirect.
If you could go to tab number 19. Turn to section 8. What is the title of section 8?
Give me just another second.
Yes, sir.
The title of chapter 8 is quality assurance requirements.
All right, sir, if you would please direct your attention to section 8.1.
Yes.
And that first paragraph, if you would please read to the court the first two sentences.
Quality assurance provides continuous confirmation that a voting system conforms with the guidelines and to the requirements of state and local jurisdictions. Quality assurance is a vendor function that is initiated prior to the system development and continues throughout the maintenance life cycle of the voting system.
And so that means while it's being used in elections.
When you talk about the maintenance life cycle of any system, that's from inception to death. So if you get a new system, you start tracking it, you analyze it, you maintain it, you record all those. We have a system that we use on our program that everything, when it comes in from procurement, it's in the system. There's change requests done on it. Everything that's done to that system is tracked until we decommission it.
All right, sir, you were asked questions about whether software updates would require a new certification. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Are you aware of whether the Dominion system has applied Windows security patches and updates since its deployment?
No, I'm not. I've seen a couple of them with ES&S, but that's something that doesn't go. To further this point, I have voiced my opinions to the lab when I was in them, that when you bring a new system in and you're going to get it certified for use and sell the product, you would agree that you would bring your best, that you would make sure everything functions, that we've tested internally and it's good. I've been in the lab, seen antivirus in the certification lab now, not even being used. So we're not even talking about having to update it yet. 2 years, definitions out of date. The version, the antivirus actual application, several years behind with multiple vulnerabilities in it. And this is just talking about the antivirus. And that's what was delivered in certification, let alone maintaining it. But as far as engineering change orders and normal patch management processes that the rest of the other industries anywhere that deal with IT, no.
So to your knowledge, are security updates being applied to the Dominion systems used in Georgia?
No, they're not. I wouldn't see all the vulnerabilities I do. You can pull any test report from the EAC site. All you have to do, type in Google, CVE, and that software listing and the version number, and guarantee you'll find multiple vulnerabilities of high and critical.
Do you have any understanding of why the state of Georgia, or let me back it up. Do you have any understanding of why the systems in Georgia have not been updated with those security patches?
No, I do not.
From a security standpoint, how would you characterize that practice?
That's gross negligence.
Y'all
You were
stupid.
asked a number of questions about the keys
That's what he's saying.
being different from one county to the next. Is that true with respect to the X509 certificates?
No, they're the same.
And they're not just the same from county to county, they're the same from state to state that you've examined?
Yes,
All right. And the same question for that vendor password, DBS Corp 08 exclamation point. Is that different for every county?
No,
Is that different from state to state?
no.
And how long has it been the same on all the Dominion systems?
Since
I saw it
2008.
in the test labs and like it's documented by the EAC even as a deficiency. So it went forward formally in 2010, but I know I've seen it prior to that.
And the vendor password,
I can guarantee DVS stands for Dominion Voting Systems. It's DVS Corp 08. They've been using that same thing since 2008.
if employed, gives a user what authority on the system?
Yes, that they would have administrative access. Here's the thing. These systems are so horrible. I want any access to the system. There are so many vulnerabilities where you can escalate your privileges. So even the normal user who wouldn't have it as they're working can just exploit one component of that system, elevate their privileges, and then act like they're an admin.
Now, you talked about escalating privileges, elevating privileges. That sounds like an industry term. What does that mean? And how is that type of thing exploited if it is?
So in normal organizations, you're going to restrict users' access. We call them privileged users on the program I work at. And even those aren't admins. They get, there's special access that you can have to run applications because some applications
Yeah, I'm muted. I know. Just, I want to point out the difference between an old lawyer asking questions and a young lawyer asking questions. This old guy is like, so what does that mean to increase privileges? That's an old lawyer asking questions, which is like, it's something he knows, but that's like the extent of his knowledge is like, obviously that means you have greater access to the system. You sort of want to get that on the record. The young lawyer is like, so when you uploaded the SHA, that was before the SQL was brought back and was brought back into the interlog faith, and it's like you're sitting there like, yeah. And I wonder, does the judge looks relatively young, like which one is more his level? Is it like the old guy asking questions or the young guy asking questions? Because these are totally different level questions.
require system level or what we refer to as root access. When those applications do, if they have a vulnerability and you're allowed to run them, you can exploit them and you can raise from your limited access. For example, in the probate judge that allowed me to look at a system in Alabama, he got a little too afraid, wouldn't let me touch, but I had him log in and his limited visibility as we looked at the systems, and that's how I came to the 300 and something vulnerabilities. He could have easily, on just the access he had, manipulated, run a script that he copied down from Google or one of the hacking websites, ran it, and been elevated his privileges up and become admin and see things he couldn't normally see. For example, a lot of the vendors will not let you see that the wireless connection's on, and you won't be limited. You can't do that. On my program, because classified systems have to be up 24/7, normal users can't shut them down. When you go to hit the power down, shut down button, you're not authorized to do that. It tells you that. You give levels of access to what they're done.
In the configuration of these Georgia election systems that we've been discussing, are they robust to nation state threats that are faced by the United States?
No, they're not.
And how would you characterize the level of capability of the adversary compared to the level of protection in these systems?
Considering nation states like China have buildings literally with people that probably make me look silly as far as my technical capabilities. It's a cakewalk. Again, I say someone of kitty scripter level 5 that watches a few YouTube videos and can understand the basics of a computer can manipulate these systems easily.
Now, you were asked a few questions about air gapping or internet connectivity, and then you express it in terms of network connectivity. Just to be clear, is the air gap that's touted in this system actually an air gap, and does it protect the system against penetration?
When there are different areas, and this is only an argument that depending on what state you're in, because how they define the system and the voting system. To me, as a security person, you have to look holistically. To me, as somebody who's hacked before, you look at the whole system because there are things in the hacking world called pivot points. For example, if I can get in on the poll book, then that means I can get to the printer. If they have the ballot on demand printers, like a lot of states do, I can manipulate that. I can insert a QR code on that could execute some malware on the tabulator. There are literally thousands of ways to do it. I see some states that actually violate their law because they say no capability, and yet the systems have capability. There's probably not an EMS out there that doesn't have a wireless or Bluetooth card on it. And I'm keeping it simple because you don't need those cards on there to manipulate and to establish a communication channel. Those are the primary ones that normal people understand.
Despite the air gapping.
Despite the air gap. And again, air gap systems can, and they'll use this term, it can include network connections. But the minute you have network connections, that you increase your attack vectors 1,000-fold. And what I will say is these air gap systems utilize compact flash, USBs, removable storage. I can tell you, I put files, they were harmless, but I put files on Dominion and the SNS systems, and they did not identify them.
Through the path of removable media?
Yes, on that, and on the systems to where they actually had the data encrypted as it should be. What I've noticed during forensic examinations is a lot of this election data is not encrypted. For example, I can't remember that Georgia County, but when they removed the compact flash or the USBs during the election and replaced them for some reason, that would leave that data that was currently on there in an unencrypted state. That does not happen until you close that tabulator, that you close the pull down on that tabulator.
And so the removable media, when they go in and out of the slots from one machine and one component of the system to another component of the system, that's mechanically bridging the air gap.
Yes, sir. And another thing is, as far as that is the election not reporting, right? When you've got your main reporting server, usually on an EMS, and it's air gapped, but yet if they reuse that, and that's where procedures come into play because some don't, if they reuse that USB and take it to the internet connected computer and transfer that data off to the other third party private entities that really shouldn't be involved in elections, when that gets done and then they plug it back in, was there any virus? Oh, we're going to check with the 2-year-old virus definitions that have never been updated. And virus definitions are irrelevant to any good hacker anyway. But the thing is there's no check on the integrity of that USB, that compact flash that gets transferred back and forth.
Between an internet connected machine
And
the server.
yes, sir.
So are we talking about a Tom Cruise Mission Impossible level terms of difficulty to get across the air gap?
No.
All right.
No.
Okay. To your understanding, is Dominion able?
And I just want to point out, this is what's so horrifying about Brad Raffensperger and the state here. It's like, obviously, I and most of you who are probably watching this right now have concerns that the Democrats are going to try and cheat in the election, or the state's going to try and cheat, because let's face it, Brian Kemp doesn't really like Trump so much, and that is Raffensperger, that they're going to try, the state's going to try and manipulate it. But just putting that aside for a second, if they were acting in remote good faith, would they not be afraid that Putin is going to access it? Would they not be afraid of China accessing it? I mean, he referenced foreign actors like China, the building full of people in China who make him look like he's incompetent when it comes to cyber technology. And I'm sure Russia does too. So it's like, you actually care about having a good faith election. Why would you be resistant to trying and doing everything you can to ensure that this is going to be run properly? I mean, how are you? Even if you think that, even if you're a Democrat, why are you not concerned that Putin, you think that Putin wants Trump to win? Why are you not concerned that Putin is going to hack into Georgia and these other Dominion systems across? I mean, he's making it sound like it's so easy, even from, you can sitting in the Caribbean and do it. You can sitting in the Kremlin and do it.
To remotely connect to these election systems.
Yes.
Are they able to do that without detection?
Yes.
And are you aware of any instances in which that has occurred?
Yes.
Can you identify those instances?
One would be the Denver, Colorado server was requested to grant Belgrade, only Belgrade. I did search. There is a Belgrade, Montana. Again, why would Montana need to connect into a Colorado file transfer server as part of the election system? And there are other components and things that were done in the background concerning the database and the configure of the database server that still do not have an engineering change order. Because if somebody works in an operational environments for a lot of different things, what I will tell you is sometimes things break or you have a problem and you have to fix it. and you submit a change request, or in this case, an engineering change order that's retroactive, right? You want to go back and make sure that you record the process so that you have change management and the integrity of the system. If you do not record changes, you lead yourself down a very bad road.
All right, sir. Does the storage and management of the encryption keys relate to or affect usability of the system?
To the user and the way the system functions, no.
Right.
Vote. If your question is, would voters be affected? Would county workers be affected? No, they would not. This, if I might state something on hard disk encryption, because I suggested that from 2008 on every year. I would listen to these software developers tell me how it's going to be a hit on performance on the election systems. These election systems are nothing but a database server that's taking in data and adding the data and printing reports. We run classified systems. Everything has disk encryption. And so I've dealt with that now. Finally, once some videos have gotten out of how easily they are to get in, they're trying to implement changes like that. And so as far as those systems and the way they design it and the functionality of affecting the voter, no.
All right, sir.
It's underneath, it's behind the scenes.
Thank you. Now, the common vendor password that we've talked about, DVS Corp 08 exclamation point. Does that relate to or affect the user experience usability?
No.
You've stated your opinion a couple of times in response to my questions about whether the system complied with the VVSG guidelines. Was that a technical opinion or a legal opinion?
That was my technical professional opinion.
All right, sir.
Now, I do know enough about contract law that when certain sections say shall and you don't violate it. So if you shall do a requirement and you don't do the requirement, I don't see how that gets to be into a legal basis. You did not follow it. It's either a yes or a no. And the way I read it, it's binary.
All right, sir. Now, you mentioned that certain components of the system are connected to a local area network.
Yes, usually your ICCs are connected and they report back that way. And then you have what's called adjudication workstations. There's different levels. Each technical data package from the vendor, they'll give different designs. Again, because each county is different size, you may not need all the components of that system. So they provide different configurations, and each of those configurations are supposed to be tested.
And the X509 certificate that we've talked about, that's how one machine on a network knows to trust another machine on
Yes,
the network.
yes, sir.
And so the X509, the presence of that on the system is designed to enable network communication. Is that right?
Yes, if one of the users, yes.
All right, sir. Now, Professor Halderman's report, if you would please turn to tab 21. Tab 21.
Okay.
Does that report identify the system component that he was analyzing?
On the front cover page,
Yes, sir.
it says it's for Georgia, and it's the ImageCast. It's the ImageCast X ballot marking device.
And is that the election server or is it something else?
That's a ballot marking device. It's for accessibility for those with disabilities. And what you do is you mark your ballot on the screen, and then it prints a ballot, which I might add, and I will state this because I know the VVSG requirements. Title 3, Section 301, Paragraph A, the voter will verify in secret and confidential or something like that, their ballot is correct before they cast it. There is no human being that can read a barcode or a QR code and verify their vote. I dealt with a hearing in Pennsylvania where the printed text at the bottom, which is not evaluated by the system, was different than the barcodes. These were ES&S systems, and people complained and they allowed it on a clerical error. The clerical error that the court dismissed everything on there is a technical flaw in the system that should be that. And to my professional opinion, based on what HAVA requirements are, that these systems, whether ES&S or that, if they use a barcode or a QR code, they're in violation of the HAVA.
All right, sir. Now, I would like for you to turn to page 48 of Exhibit 21, the Halderman report. And let me know when you're there. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
You see the indented line towards the bottom.
Yes, sir.
Does that look familiar to you?
Yes, it does.
And what database, well, tell me what that is and what database is being queried.
And
That would-
I'll just object at this point. We don't have this in evidence. And so I think this is getting a little squirrely in terms of how we're handling the.
Do we do,
Want me to read it?
what's the ultimate point here? If it's not for the truth of the matter.
And this is in rebuttal of questioning on cross that the database with the encryption keys vulnerability existed only on the server. And this report demonstrates otherwise, and I'm calling it to his attention.
And Your Honor, I'll just say that wasn't the testimony. I don't believe. I believe the testimony was there's a SQLite database that's on the BMD versus the entire database.
But you were questioning his credibility on
Regardless,
that.
wouldn't that, you're now doing exactly what you said you would be unable to do, which is to say that whoever wrote this report, you're now putting it in for the truth of what's in the report.
I'll ask him if he has independent knowledge. Do you have independent knowledge of whether the encryption keys are stored in plain text on the ballot marking device?
Yes, they're the secret private keys, and they're obviously, this is the same exact query.
And how do you know that they're, apart from Haldeman's report, do you know that?
Because these Rondell encryption keys are symmetric. There's two different types of encryption. There's symmetric and asymmetric. And
This guy's
that's the
a
reason
rock.
they're a private key and they're supposed to be stored securely, not in plain text, is because if you get the key, you now risk exposure. They're a lot faster to authenticate and they're used, but usually, and we'll talk server communications and authentication, you authenticate with asymmetric, right? Public-private certs. That's quicker. You get the connection, then you exchange the private key. And these are considered private keys and they're sitting on the tabulators.
Do you know
There's
that?
ICX in this point.
Do you know that apart from the Haldeman report?
Is actually having an ICX image myself? No,
So how do you know it?
because the queries here and the way the components are built and designed, they have to. It's just a technological piece of it.
In order for the ballot marking devices to work as a part of the,
How would the tabulator decrypt the DVD configuration files and operate if it couldn't decrypt the encryption?
and
It's basics.
in order to do that, it has to have the same encryption keys,
Yes, because of the way this is. Yes.
and those encryption keys that were used to encrypt those files, that was done on a,
The same key and the same vector are on the tabulators, the other components.
you mentioned supply chain. Help the court to understand what the concept of supply chain vulnerability is.
Well, considering Lockheed Martin made me go through class on this, I'll try to keep it short for the court. But especially specifically in any major company where you were worried about, especially in the DoD environment, you're going to build a weapon system, an information system, whatever the case is. You want to know that from the concept of the products used to build your components is done in a secure manner. Because technology today, you can fit a microprocessor on the tip of your finger and barely it'll look like a speck of rice, even smaller. And these things are that. I know Northrop Grumman touts it on their website. And the thing with these type of things, it can be embedded. Years ago, there was a USB battery charger that they did not discover that China had malware on it until 10 years after the fact. It had already went off market before. So how many computer systems, how many people's systems were infected with that? And that's why you have to look at the products where they go from. It's called global supply chain. And you go through that management. And certain companies have the training, and it's so you ensure the products and the components that you use to assemble your system are secure.
And the system, the election systems that are used in Georgia, do you know anything about their supply chain? You mentioned it in response to Mr. Tyson's questions. What can you tell us about that?
I cannot speak, I have not seen the 5.5A technical data package. I will tell you, I've seen several other technical data packages, and to that fact, some of these components that are in the newer versions are the same components that are in the older versions.
When you're talking about hardware components?
Yes, sir. And so because these tabulators are basically optical scanners with some other homegrown software thrown on them and other components, certain kind of little small printer to print reports and do the things it needs to do. You have to have separate in the bins. You're supposed to separate stuff that goes into the adjudication database to a different one and all that. So there's a lot of mechanical points. They build these things. I will say some of them are built poorly because they're supposed to run off backup battery in case you use power. As they found out in Arizona, you've got to plug them in 20 minutes before you can even power them back on or they'll start charging. That's poor system design. And so anyway, these components have to be listed in the technical data package. What I can tell you, I personally verified, is that there are same email addresses for components that go from different countries, and then there's bogus ones, and it's laughable at what they consider supply chain management as far as voting systems.
That's all the questions I have.
Any recross on those points, Mr.
Just
Tyson?
briefly, Your Honor, my best on this. I want to follow up on a few of Mr. McDougall's questions. First of all, as I understood your testimony, it's your belief that any ballot marking device system that's used for all voters that uses a barcode or a QR code either is or should be illegal. Is that right?
Yes.
And so there's no configuration of Georgia's Dominion system, if it prints a QR code, that you would consider to be compliant with existing law and structures involving voting systems.
See, I warned you about this. He's going to try and portray it as there's nothing that this guy will ever be happy with. So why try to do anything?
Right.
As far as with the voter being able to independently verify.
Mr. McDougall asked you about applying system updates. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You would agree with me that Dr. Halderman covered system vulnerabilities in his report in the Curling trial, right? System update vulnerabilities.
Yes.
And he also covered privilege escalation as part of his report.
Yes.
And he also covered root access in his report.
Yes.
He also covered nation state threats faced by the United States and states.
Yes. As far as ease, I believe is the way we reference it. As far as ease of access, getting into the systems.
Mr. McDougall asked you about internet connectivity. You mentioned you put some files onto Dominion systems. Did I get that right?
Yes.
And you did that in your lab environment at the voting system test lab, right?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall asked you about the air gap and moving election results from the EMS over to the election night reporting computer for each county. You have not reviewed the training that is provided to county election officials about how to do those uploads, right?
Specifically to Georgia? No.
You also mentioned Dominion remotely connecting to election systems, but you don't have any evidence that occurred in Georgia, correct?
There was one county. I've seen a lot of Dominion
It's a
emails.
Gwinnett.
I've had to translate Dominion emails from Serbian to English to verify the technical questions I was being asked about them, to verify that it was translated properly. So
it's your testimony that there is evidence of Dominion remotely accessing Georgia election equipment?
yes, on the one county, it was included with stuff that I was researching and reading through, considering Colorado. Michigan was also involved, and there were other ones.
And so I'm focused specifically on Georgia, and we're referencing the Gwinnett County 2020 incident. Is that what you're referring to?
I believe so. I have went through a lot of Dominion emails.
And ultimately, for all the different vulnerabilities we're talking about, someone has to gain access to the system in some way, right?
Yes, either locally or remotely.
And I believe earlier we covered that of all these different vulnerabilities, that every voting system has vulnerabilities, right?
That's
Every
why-
system has vulnerabilities. The thing is these voting systems, irrespective of the vendor, have a ton more. I don't take that saying your home PC is more secure lightly. I'm a professional with over 20 years experience in this field. I've worked in every federal agency there is. I've been consulted by private companies. I worked internationally for NATO, recovered NATO's infrastructure when it was being rebuilt and had an issue. So I do not state that lightly.
This is a recross, which is like blowing up in his face. You're basically letting him finish on a strong note here. The lawyer understands computers better than I do, but he's literally just keeps it's like he keeps firing off his gun, and it's aimed at his own toes. This is just not good lawyering. It's a guy who's insightful about computers and not good lawyering.
These systems are horrible.
And you'd agree that ultimately each state has to decide which vulnerabilities it wants to encounter when it's choosing an election system, right?
That's basic risk management, and that resides even outside of technology areas. There's all kind of risk assessment and analysis, and there's risk. Even with anybody that deals with a contract knows this.
But ultimately, it's up to the state to make that selection of that voting system, right?
Yes.
That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. McDougall, can this witness be excused?
You may, Your Honor.
All right, thanks, sir. Please step down. All right, you may call your next witness.
I call Ben Cotton to the stand.
Ben Cotton. Finally, Ben Cotton's coming up. I'm saying that facetiously. I have no idea who he is.
That's why I should get appointed.
I do like the name.
Please state, spell, place, and last name for the board.
I think he's another potential expert witness.
My name is Benjamin, Benjamin, Cotton, Cotton.
All right, Mr. Cotton, where do you live?
I live in Big Fork, Montana.
How are
Yeah.
you employed?
Well, until this last Friday, I was the Vice President for Incident Response for eCentire USA. I retired from that position. As you may be aware, incident response is a 24/7, 365 commitment, and my wife was diagnosed with a medical condition that requires someone to care for her.
So you mentioned incident response. What does that mean?
Incident response is the industry term for responding to a crisis in which a hacker has penetrated a network and is exploiting that network, whether it be for personal gain, monetary gain, or just kicks and giggles.
And so that's IRT. Is there something called HIRT?
The HIRT program, HIRT, stands for Hunting and Incident Response Team, and that is a subdivision of the DHS CISA agency, and I have supported that as an active member.
And so the hunting part is what?
The hunting is actually looking for finding out who did the penetrations, looking for these breaches, and then trying to perform attribution to those intrusions.
Prior to your last employment, I can't remember the name or pronounce it correctly. What did you do?
So I basically got into computer forensics through the military. I'm a 21-year veteran of the military, of the Army. 19 years of that was spent within the Army Special Operations Command. The last 6 years of that was spent in support of a special mission unit as a fully qualified operator. As part of that military service, I got involved in what myself and two other people for that special mission unit termed digital media exploitation. And that is essentially exploiting devices that we found on the battlefield and turning that into actionable intelligence to feed the operations and intel cycle. Operations and intelligence cycle. In 2003, I retired.
From the military?
From the military, and I became a civilian contractor for the Drug Enforcement Agency as a senior forensic examiner in the digital forensics lab in Lorton, Virginia for the DEA. I subsequently moved or was asked to join an effort that performed the deep dive computer forensics for the high value terrorist target disk drives that were seized overseas as part
I predict he gets qualified as an expert.
of the CIA.
Was that for in connection with the Gulf War, or was it generally post 9/11 work?
That was post 9/11 work, basically from the beginning of 2004 through 2007. I was part of the team that did all those deep forensics examinations.
So after you, so then what? Take me up to
eCentire.
eCentire, thank you.
So eCentire, that's E_SENTIRE.
Take me up to them.
So I created a company called Cyber Technology Services. We did business as SciTech Services. We supported the intelligence community, other government agencies, both from analytic and digital forensic support through that time period. Additionally, when I retired from the military, I was hired by Guidance Software. They were subsequently acquired by OpenText. That's one word, OPENTEXT. And I was an instructor for the EnCase forensic software. So I taught other experts how to use the EnCase software.
And what is the EnCase software?
The EnCase software is a GUI-based analytical platform that will perform forensics imaging, and it will also conduct detailed analysis and allow the examiner to conduct detailed analysis of forensics images of digital media that is pertinent to law enforcement, intelligence, or whatever the issue may be.
That's a standard tool in the business.
It is.
All right, sir. So you formed this company called SciTech,
That's correct.
and did you remain at SciTech all the way till
eCentire?
eCentire?
No, I did not. So as part of the SciTech experience, we actually created our own digital forensic software designed for very large enterprises. And essentially, if you're familiar with computer forensics, then you've ran into a one examiner, one computer dynamic where it's very difficult to analyze and triage tens or hundreds of thousands of computers at once. Our software was created so that we could perform forensics analysis across hundreds of thousands of computers simultaneously and return results in the same amount of time as it would take to examine one computer. That software we spun out into its own company in 2018 called Cypher. That's CYFIR.
And what was your role in the development of the Cypher software?
It was my brainchild. And I also assisted in the development, the testing, and the full spectrum as CEO of that company.
And then from Cypher to eCentire.
So eCentire actually purchased Cypher in 2021, and they insisted that I come along as part of that deal.
All right, sir. Any notable achievements in the attribution of significant cyber penetrations or hacks?
Yes, so as part of a demonstration to the Office of Personnel Management in, I believe that was April of 2015, we discovered the Chinese breach of OPM, which resulted in the largest breach in the history of the US government. And that was attributed back to the Chinese.
And how long had that gone undetected, if you know?
Almost 3 years.
Do you hold any security clearances?
I do. I hold a top secret government security clearance.
Have you ever had higher levels of clearance than you do currently?
As needed per specific programs, I have been involved in multiple secret compartmentalized information or SCI programs.
All right, sir. Any prizes or awards in your field?
I don't remember the exact ones. We had multiple, best technology, leading technology, that type of thing, from different magazines and industry groups.
All right, I believe you've got a binder on the table there with you.
Yes.
If you would please turn to tab number 22.
I'm there.
Can you, and you see a document there marked exhibit number 22. First page, lower right corner.
Yes, I see it.
All right. We're all
Is
set.
can you tell the court what that is?
This
Oh,
is a
geez.
copy of my CV.
All right, sir. I'll tender exhibit 22 into evidence, Your Honor.
No objection.
All right, applicants 22 is admitted without objection.
All right, we talked about your background, training experience. Anything else on the CV that you think is worth pointing out to the court?
Well, I do have a master's degree in information systems management, and I hold a CISSP certification as well.
All right, any other certifications?
I am a certified investigator with the Cypher technology as well.
All right. And do the certifications that you hold require ongoing training or updating or continuing education?
Yes.
And you complete those every year?
Yes.
You gonna qualify him now?
Are you familiar with the election systems used in Georgia?
I am.
How are you familiar with it?
I was first asked to become familiar with them as a retained expert by Stephanie Lambert for her client, Misty Hampton in Coffee County.
And what version of Dominion software is used in Georgia?
Dominion Democracy Suite version 5.5 alpha.
I'm going to be speeding up now just through the period of his being qualified as an expert, because this is not stuff that's really going to be helpful.
Hey.
In the course of your work and training and experience, have you had occasion to become familiar with something called FIPS 140-2?
Yes.
And how did you become familiar with that?
Well, FIPS 140-2 is required anytime a technology that's going to be utilized by the federal government and contains security encryption functionality. It has to be FIPS compliant. And so our Cypher software, I became very familiar with FIPS in the development of that software and our algorithms.
And so how would you characterize your level of familiarity with FIPS 140-2?
I would say that it is more advanced than the average security guy. I'm not a FIPS certification expert, but I'm certainly aware of the criteria.
All right, and if you would please turn to tab 20 and tell the court whether you recognize the document marked exhibit number 20.
Yes,
And what is it?
that is the FIPS Pub 140-2.
Pub,
Yeah, right at the very top.
not
FIPS
like
Pub
a
means
English or
published.
Irish pub, right? It's a publication,
Publication
and it's put out by,
by NIST.
who are they?
They are the National Institute for Science and Technology, I believe is what that stands for.
Standards and Technology.
Standards and Technology. Yeah,
And got you guys on acronyms today.
there you go.
Given your work in cybersecurity, are you familiar with something called encryption keys?
Yes, I am.
What are they?
Encryption keys are utilized from two aspects. One is to authenticate accesses to ensure that when a system or a user is actually accessing a system, that they are supposed to access it. And it's also used to encrypt and decrypt information and protect that data from unauthorized disclosure.
Now, are you familiar with the industry standard protocols or practices for the storage and management of encryption keys?
I'm familiar with the requirements, yes.
Right, sir. And are you also familiar with the U.S. Election Assistance Commission certification requirements as they relate to encryption keys?
I have reviewed them. I don't know that I would class myself as an expert, but I am familiar with them.
All right. And does FIPS 140-2 address the topic of encryption keys?
Yes, it does.
And you're familiar with that?
Yes.
Have you had occasion to examine the election? You've answered this in part already, but have you had occasion to examine election databases in any Georgia counties that were used in the 2020 election?
Yes, I have.
Can you identify the counties that you've examined?
Yes. So Bibbs, Telfar, Appling, Jones, and Coffee.
All right, sir. Have you examined those databases with respect to the storage and management therein of encryption keys?
I have.
Have you examined or analyzed what could be done by a bad actor who had possession of the encryption keys for the election systems used in Georgia?
I have.
Have you ever testified as an expert before?
Yes, I have.
About how many times?
I was first qualified as an expert in federal court in 2007. And between depositions and actual court appearances, at least 4 or 5 expert engagements per year after that.
Okay, since 2007?
Correct.
4 or 5 a year?
Yes.
Right. Have you ever been excluded as an expert due to lack of training, skill, qualifications, or expertise?
No.
Have you ever testified as an expert regarding any aspect of the Georgia election systems or Dominion election systems?
Yes, I have.
And where have you done that?
Specifically in Arizona. I also have provided declarations in Michigan on 3 separate occasions. I have provided declarations in support of Supreme Court appeals, reference Arizona as well.
And what aspects did your testimony cover in those instances?
Cybersecurity basics, the state of the systems, state of the databases, and the vulnerability aspects of the systems.
Have you ever testified regarding the encryption keys and how they're stored and managed in these systems?
By declaration and affidavit, yes.
And when was the first such declaration?
Well, the first time I was aware of these encryption keys issues was in March of 2021 as part of the Antrim lawsuit. I provided input to the declarations and affidavits at that time, and I also have provided declarations concerning these databases more recently in the Arizona case
In March of this year.
in March of this year.
And do you recall the first time you ever connected encryption keys to certification standards, if you ever did?
The first time I really was asked about that was in conjunction with this case, and that would have been about a month and a half ago.
Your Honor, at this point, I tender Mr. Cotton as an expert on cybersecurity in general, encryption keys and how they should be stored and managed and how they are actually stored and managed in the election systems used in Georgia.
Jason?
It's what are Your Honor? Good afternoon, Mr. Cotton. My name is Brian Tyson. I represent the Secretary in this case. I wanted to ask, I believe Mr. McDougall asked you about your testimony on the Georgia system, and you mentioned an Arizona case. Did you talk about the Georgia system in any of your testimony in the other states that you mentioned?
As part of my declarations, I have included the Georgia analysis in the analyzed systems from a holistic perspective.
But you had not offered opinions specific as to Georgia's election system in Arizona or Michigan or other states, right?
Only to the state of the correlation of widespread vulnerabilities across the Dominion systems.
Not yet.
And your first work in
That's what this
cybersecurity
cross
related
is
to voting
for.
machines happened after the
This is
2020
voir
election,
dire.
right?
That's correct.
And for your testimony today, you're relying on your review of the Coffee County EMS. Is that in part? part of your reliance?
In part, yes,
And you're also relying on the databases from the 4 counties that you referenced?
correct.
Have you reviewed any EMS files from any other Georgia county besides Coffee County?
Are you talking a forensics image of those devices, or are you talking just the databases?
A forensic image of those devices.
Only Coffee County.
Do you have access to any other counties, a forensic image of any other counties EMS in Georgia besides Coffee?
I do not. However, I would offer my services should the Secretary of State make those available.
For the love of God, please use me to help fix your
Now, in part
crap.
of forming your opinions in this case, you relied on Dr. Holderman's report in the Curling case, right?
I reviewed his report. What I'm relying on is my own analysis and findings within the scope of this case.
So fair to say you reviewed his report as part of your process, but you did your own analysis of the systems. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
Now, you don't have any specialized knowledge regarding election administration, correct?
Only what I've gained as a experience since 2020 as part of these legal proceedings.
And you don't have any special training or knowledge about Georgia's system apart from what you've looked at with the Coffee County system and these 4 databases. Is that right?
Well, unfortunately, the ability to analyze those systems is strictly controlled, and some might say hidden, by the restrictions put in place in Georgia.
So that would be a yes to my question then. You're relying on what you've looked at, those 5 items.
I am relying on what I have looked at as the basis of my examination.
So we've basically kept you from being able to learn how to actually to uncover all the corruption that we're hiding so well.
And are you being paid for your work in this case?
I am
And what is your hourly rate?
$350 an hour.
And when were you first hired to work on this case?
I was first engaged for this matter, probably the end of July. I was asked to take a look at it.
I say, Your Honor, we would don't have a dispute of Mr. Cotton testifying about cybersecurity generally. Don't think he has a sufficient basis for specialized knowledge about the Georgia election system itself to testify as to the Georgia specific components of the Dominion system. So we'd object on that basis.
The system, including all aspects of it, not necessarily like to include the encryption keys that are the heart of the issue.
Yes, Your Honor, to include the encryption key. I think you can speak to encryption key storage and management generally, but the scope, as I understood it, was specific to the Georgia election system, and we would object to that.
All right, but it's fair to say he's saying he's just making extrapolations based on what he learned through Coffee County. Is that
Correct. I think that's right. Yes.
all right? I'll note the objection. That's preserved for the record. But I'll overrule it. Mr. Cotton can proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. On that point, did you examine the backup election databases from Appling, Bibb, Jones, and Telfair?
I did.
And so your opinion is based not just on your examination of the Coffee County forensic image, but also the files.
And just to clarify, now that he's been qualified, what that means is he can give his opinion as opposed to a normal witness can only testify about that which they've seen. He's able to actually speculate and give his opinion about things and talk about things that he's never seen based on the areas that he's been qualified as an expert.
The backup election databases in the other 4 counties.
Correct.
So you've examined 5 Georgia counties.
Yes.
And have you examined any other Dominion systems anywhere else other than Georgia?
Yes.
And you examined the databases in those systems as well?
Yes.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Are encryption keys any part of the Dominion system used here in Georgia?
Yes, they are.
How are they used in the system here?
So they are used to authenticate systems, establish trust between one system and another, authenticate the user activities on a trusted system. They are also used to protect the data. So for example, in a tabulator, when you scan the ballots, you are generating images of those ballots, and you are also generating a results file, .dvd, and you're generating a cast vote record as part of that. So those keys are utilized to, one, encrypt the DVD files, and any encrypted file that system utilizes, those specific encryption keys are used to encrypt that data. It's also used to facilitate the transmission or transport of that data, whether that be over a network or whether that be via a USB or SD card. Those encryption keys are critical to ensuring the integrity and the assurance of the voting process.
In light of how they are used, are they important to the security of the system?
They're vital. It might be noted that if one takes the time to examine the certification documents that are present on the public website at the EAC, there's actually a matrix there of risk mitigation strategies from different threats. And encryption of data and the securing of transmissions is used in almost every single one of those mitigation efforts. That shows you how important it is for those keys to the system.
If a bad actor with some skill has access to the system and can they get access to the encryption keys?
Yes.
And if they do that, if they're able to do that, how would you characterize the overall security of that system?
Well, in context of the voting system, they could completely manipulate and control both the reporting and the artifacts that are contained for some of the levels of the audits that are conducted by different states.
And how is it that access to the encryption keys would enable them to do something like that?
So, simple scenario. Let's say, for example, that the encryption keys or the voting results on the SD cards from the tabulators are being transported from the precinct to the location of the EMS. If an insider or an unauthorized person could gain access to that SD card and had access to the encryption keys, they could decrypt the results, change the results, modify the ballot images on that SD card to conform with those changed results, re-encrypt it, re-SHA hash it, and submit that to the EMS, and the EMS would know the difference. That's one scenario. Second
Wow.
scenario, if you're actually
Wow.
transmitting data via a networked interface,
That's
they
horrifying.
could do the same thing in what's known as a man-in-the-middle attack, leveraging the 509 keys and those encryption keys in combination.
To do effectively the same thing that you just described with the
Correct.
cards. In light of their importance to system security, how should encryption keys be stored or managed?
It actually sounds like it would take 90 seconds.
They should certainly be protected like the family jewels. They are a critical component of the
It actually sounds like the sort of thing you can do faster than you can actually say you did it.
integrity and the surety of that election and the functioning of that system.
And is that topic covered in FIPS 140-2?
It is its key management principles.
And in a nutshell, can you describe for the court what FIPS 140-2 requires?
You just
with
need a
respect to the
program.
Storage and management of encryption keys.
You don't do it
If
by
they
hand.
contain
one by
outside
one.
of the actual encryption module themselves, then they must also be protected and encrypted.
All right. With respect to Appling, Bibb, Coffee, Jones, and Telfair, can you describe what you examined?
Yes, so I was directed to a website, zebraduck.org, I believe is the name of that. Zebra, ZEBRADUCK.
And I have a
Org.
witness to explain that name.
I will have to rely on other outside experts to explain the name. I was directed to this website, and it contained the responses from public records requests throughout the state of Georgia. Those 4 counties were part of those postings on that website. They were posted there in the form of a zip file, a 7-zip file. So it has a .7z extension on it. I downloaded those files and extracted them. First thing I did was I looked for a verification hash for the databases. When I did not initially see that on the first download, we queried back to the organization that posted them, and they provided us another link to a site that they had the original files that were placed up there, and those did have the 7-zip file of the whole package and an accompanying SHA value for those files. So I
And
downloaded those as well.
All right. And did you do anything to determine if the files you examined were authentic?
Yes, I did.
Did that vary by county?
The procedure was the same. Obviously, the files that I checked were different. One has a name X and this one has a name Y. However, the first thing that I did was I created my own SHA value for the 7-zip file that was related to each county. I then compared that SHA value to the SHA value that was posted by the Dominion system in conjunction with the production of this package.
And
Barely an
when you
inconvenience.
So on 3 of the counties, they matched perfectly. On one of the counties, which was Jones, there was a mismatch. And so I further examined that particular mismatch and determined that at some point, someone had mistakenly added that SHA value to the 7-zip package for the encryption, and that had changed the value. I further dug into that particular package specific to the database file and the project package .xml file, and determined that the dates and times of that file matched what was produced with the Dominion voting software.
based on your examination, as you have just described it, with respect to the backup databases in the 4 counties, do you have an opinion, a professional opinion, as an expert as to whether the files you examined are authentic?
Yes, they are.
All right. Now, you, are you familiar with how the Dominion system works?
Basically, yes.
And how are you familiar with it to that extent?
I've been examining these systems since 2021. I've actually created virtual machines of the forensics imaging that we have taken, and I have operated the systems in a virtual isolated environment.
All right, sir. Now, can you characterize the fidelity of the backups to the operational databases on the machines?
Well, I can tell you that I have the unique opportunity to have a forensics image of Coffee County with that database in its operational state. And so I did examine the Coffee County database. I compared the artifacts of that database to the backup databases we received, and they are fundamentally the same construct, and they would represent the operational databases of those counties.
And does that provide a reliable factual basis for the opinions you have given based on your analysis of those databases and the encryption keys that are in them?
Absolutely. If it exists in that backup database at that point in time where they made that backup, all the data in that backup existed in the operational database.
Now, you've mentioned Coffee County a couple of times, and you've made reference to a forensic image. Would you please describe to the court how you came into possession of that forensic image?
So by direction of my attorney, I was given access to a download site from a firm called Sullivan Strickler. And Sullivan Strickler had been engaged by Coffee County or some person to perform a forensics preservation of the Coffee County EMS, ICC, a Dominion supplied laptop, and some poll pads.
Okay. And how, when you went on there and retrieved it, what did you retrieve?
So when I downloaded those files from the secure website, first thing I did was verify the images. And in this particular case, all of these images were in an in-case image format, which I know well. It's a forensically preserved, a bit-for-bit copy of that device that was the target of that imaging operation. It is a self-verification mechanism as well. So when you verify a forensics image in EnCase, it will tell you if any bit of that data is changed or if it's deviated from the original hash value at the time of the imaging of that device.
And what did that software report to you about the Coffee County image that you examined?
They verified.
And in your field of work, cyber forensics,
The objective of this
is
hearing is to
the
force them to
in-case
act.
image through the method you've described considered to be self-authenticating.
Yes, not only self-authenticating, but it's the industry standard for admission into court.
And so in your expert opinion, both the Coffee County files you examined and the files from the other 4 counties are in fact authentic digital records of the systems in those counties?
Yes.
I will, at this point, Your Honor, I renew my tender on the 4 counties, the flash drives. I don't have a flash drive or in-case image or anything like that for Coffee, but I would intend to ask him questions about Coffee, subject to the ruling of the court.
And I think that I'd already kind of conditionally admitted them.
Right.
So if there's any update from Mr. Tyson, I think we would proceed along those lines.
Your Honor, I think just waiting for a copy, but we don't have any objection to them.
All right, so if they're admitted, if they're authenticated, then we can dispense with my authentication witnesses, several of whom are outside. And we can release them from sequestration.
All right.
You can let them know they can come back. They can come on in.
Oh, good. We just saved like
Thank you, Your Honor.
probably like an hour of testimony, a very boring testimony. Authentication is basically verifying that everything is what it purports to be. So
What, if anything, did you do
it's
to check on the
necessary evil
encryption
of
keys in the
litigation.
election databases that you looked at in these 5 counties?
So the first thing I did was to verify their existence. I knew which tables they would reside in. I navigated to that location of those tables and verified that those encryption keys were there. And I did that in each of the 5 counties.
And is it your opinion that the encryption keys that you found in the backup databases in the 4 counties are the same, in the same state or condition in terms of storage as they are in the operational databases for those counties?
Yes, the reason that you make a backup is so that you can immediately restore that backup copy to an operational state in the event that something goes bad with the EMS server during an election. So by definition, those encryption keys would have had to been the same as the encryption key state
All right,
in
so-
the operational database.
And so when you looked at these 5 databases, what did you find in terms of how the encryption keys were stored?
In all 5 databases, those encryption keys were stored in unencrypted text, open text.
Was there any control on access to the encryption keys?
Not really. And the reason I say not really is because in the Coffee County EMS and in all other Dominion systems which I have examined, they are utilizing a user authentication to the database. So that means that if you are at the keyboard of the computer, then you have access, full access to that database. So the vulnerabilities for a Windows system are well known. The antivirus had not been updated since the Coffee County Dominion suite had been installed in September of 2019. There's roughly 1 million new exploits released every day. And so when you do the math, you're talking about millions of additional vulnerabilities that that system would not have detected. There were no system patches applied. Once again, hundreds of
No
vulnerabilities
patches
that were
applied.
admitted by the operating system owner, Microsoft. They release a patch every Thursday. So the fact that that hadn't been updated after the
In 5
installation of
years,
Dominion software,
it's
you
pathetic.
know, is
Pathetic.
It's just
Say
basically an open
pathetic.
state. You know, we've heard other experts say that it's just wide open, and it really is wide open.
Does what you have described with respect to the storage and management of encryption keys on the election system in Georgia comply with FIPS 140-2 as a technical matter?
No.
Is that a close call?
No.
You may not know the answer, but does it comply with the voluntary voting systems guidelines
And I'll
as
just
a
object.
technical matter?
I'm just objecting in terms of lack of foundation. I don't think we've talked about VVSG with this.
Well, you're
with
right.
this at all.
I take it back if I can. Are you familiar with the voluntary voting systems guidelines provisions on security, cybersecurity?
I've reviewed them, yes.
Do you know enough about that to say whether the management and storage of the encryption keys on the election systems in Georgia complies with the voluntary voting system guidelines?
I
And
would
it's okay.
say they do not.
All right, sir. Have you examined any Dominion election systems in other jurisdictions outside of the state of Georgia?
I have
What jurisdictions?
Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Colorado.
And on those systems, did you check on how the encryption keys were stored?
I did.
And what did you find?
I found they're stored in the same state, which is plain text,
Unencrypted.
unencrypted. And I might add that with those different analysis, it's not only that they're in the same storage state, but Georgia uses Democracy Suite 5.5 Alpha. Arizona used Democracy Suite 5.5 Bravo, and Colorado used Democracy Suite 5.10.
And so that's those are subsequent updates of the system,
That's correct.
but they all had the same characteristic.
Yes.
As a matter of cybersecurity, how would you characterize that
Hopefully.
situation?
Well, it depends on how I'm looking at it. If I'm looking at it from a hacker's point of view, hallelujah. If I'm looking at it from a cybersecurity perspective, I can't believe that anybody would ever do
No,
this.
son.
You know, if you're talking about the criticality of the ensuring the integrity of the vote, which is the base for our democracy, then how could you ever leave this unprotected? So I quite find it, frankly, appalling.
I like his calm, measured demeanor. And
if
understand,
a
we're watching this at
representative of
1 1/4
Secretary of State
speed. It's
made a
even
statement
slower.
that
when we
Georgia's
catch up
election
in a few
system
minutes.
was the most secure in the world. What would be your opinion about that statement?
Your Honor, I'll just object here in terms of it's about the election system. He's not an expert on that. And I don't think there's any basis or foundation for him to have known every election system in the world to respond.
Okay, I'll withdraw the question.
Right.
Mr. Cotton, would you describe the Dominion system that you've examined in the 5 Georgia counties and in other jurisdictions around the
That's
country
secure.
as the most secure computer election system in the world?
I would not.
Russia's
Second
more
place?
secure.
No.
All right. You had an opportunity sitting in the courtroom to observe the demonstration videos that Mr. Parikh played for the court. You recall that?
I do.
And can you give an opinion about the significance for cybersecurity purposes of what those demos show? And if you can do them one at a time, or you can do them in the aggregate.
So I basically what it shows and demonstrates, and by the way, I have performed independently each and every one of those activities to ensure that they are accurate. So what I can tell you is that those are just 3 snippets of vulnerabilities and methodologies by which you can gain access and manipulate this system. Okay, but it does show a general lack of
Basic.
security within the voting system, specifically within the database. And that database is critical to recording and reporting the results of an election. I also have the advantage in this particular case to have access to the full forensic image of the Coffee County EMS. And so I took that one step further. I said, well, are those passwords present as the Windows user authentication passwords on any of these systems from Coffee County? And so I analyzed all of the passwords for the user accounts for the ICC, the Dominion Supplied Laptop, and the EMS. And the DVS Corp 08 exclamation point was present as the primary password for all of the accounts on the Coffee County adjudication system. Okay. So now you not only have a vendor supplied password in the SQL database, but you've got a vendor supplied password for the only mediocre protection of the database. So basically, what is demonstrated here is a total lack of cybersecurity with respect to the Dominion EMS and the voting system.
All right, so that was the password video, if I recall correctly.
That is correct.
Showed us DVS Corp 08 exclamation point. The second one, do you recall what the second one was about?
The second one was the tabulator passwords. And those were encrypted passwords that are contained within the election definition file and also the election database.
And the encryption keys were used to decrypt those passwords?
Yes.
Is that method of password management compliant with cybersecurity standards as you understand them?
No.
What is the significance from a cybersecurity password of having common usernames and passwords for all the users?
Well, there's a couple of very critical points here. One, you're using the same username for every single account on the tabulators, as well as on the Coffee County EMS. There is a standard list of generic usernames that are present on every single Dominion voting system that I have examined. Okay. If the passwords are all the same and the usernames are all the same, then there's no accountability as to who did what in the event that you do find something wrong. So you don't know who did it, right? Furthermore, over time, if someone, like in the case of an election worker, is a volunteer in one election, they would have that same username configuration piece specifically for the databases for the next 10 years until they changed them. So, you know, that really broadens the extent to which someone can exploit these vulnerabilities, and there's no accountability for those.
Wow.
All right, sir.
He's killing them. He's burying them.
So if I understand you correctly, username and password in Colorado is the same as it is in Bibb County, Georgia?
For the specific usernames in the SQL database, yes. Okay, for those 3 specific usernames, it's DVS Corp 08 exclamation point. What I have found is that specific to the Windows login, you have the same list of usernames and then a shared password for all the different accesses to that Windows system. So what this means is that if you're trying to regulate what privileges a specific user has. So you want them here at the EMS user level. They can use the very same password to simply jump up to the EMS admin and have full control over that system.
And so we heard testimony from Mr. Parikh that the DBS Corp 08 exclamation point password has been present on the system, identified as a vulnerability since no later than 2010.
I would submit that given the nature and the syntax of the password, probably since 2008.
How would you characterize that as a cybersecurity matter?
Horrendous.
In your examination of any of these Dominion systems, have you seen any indication of non-election personnel remotely accessing a Dominion system?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
I too have reviewed a series of emails produced by Dominion in which they're discussing remoting into Gwinnett County, Georgia. I have also reviewed depositions from Coffee County, in which the election clerk specifically details how 2 Dominion employees fixed her voting system from the parking
Your Honor,
lot.
I'll just object here. I think we're in a triple hearsay at this point, at least.
Unless you've got an exception that comes to mind, Mr. McDougall, I think I would agree with that.
I don't think I can think of an exception, Your Honor.
All right, that'll be sustained. Next question.
All right, sir. Have you at any point had any discussions with anyone from the Secretary of State's office about the encryption keys issue?
I have.
Can you tell the court about that, please?
In the Supreme Court affidavit, I had mentioned that I had analyzed a Bibb County database, and we immediately got a call from the Secretary of State's office and correspondence demanding to know how I got access to the Bibb County election system. My attorney that represented me at that, Mr. Kurt Olson, handled those communications primarily, but we did have a Zoom conference. I can't off the top of my head recall every person who was there as part of that conference, but they're all representatives of the Secretary of State's office.
And what was the topic of discussion in that call?
They had misread the declaration, and they had thought that I had access to the physical voting systems, that I had analyzed the physical voting systems, not just the database.
All right. And was there any discussion of the encryption keys or your findings and opinions on that topic?
With the call, no. However, the very fact that the only reason they were calling me was because I had called out the encryption keys in that declaration, they would have had knowledge of the issue.
Did they ask you any questions about the encryption keys vulnerability?
No.
Was there any discussion about what ought to be done to mitigate that risk?
No.
And when was that?
That would have been in the July timeframe, I believe.
All right.
Put a year on that.
24. Your Honor.
Okay. I am.
Actually, I take that back. It would have been 2 days after the submission of of that document in support of the Supreme Court petition.
All right. And I'm going to ask you to turn to tab number 5.
Yes.
And that's a document marked as Exhibit 5. Have you ever seen that before?
Yes, I have.
Now, this is an email thread, and to be fair, you are not shown as being a sender or receiver. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so how is it that you're familiar with the document?
I was shown this by the attorney.
All right, sir. And does this refresh your recollection of when approximately your conversation with the Secretary of State's office occurred?
Yes, it's says Sunday, August 25th.
Well, let's go back down a little bit.
And the thread looks like it originates March 28th.
All right, and it's fair to say, or did the Secretary of State's office ever follow up with you to talk about what your findings were?
No. Once we had sent them the data on where we had obtained the backup file, That was the last I heard from the Secretary of State.
Of course. 'Cause they don't give a damn. They don't care. You don't care. Yeah.
Is compliance with FIPS 140-2 an ongoing obligation as you understand it?
Absolutely.
And I'll just object on the grounds that obligation to what and under what.
I told you.
I'll rephrase the question, Your Honor. Is as a technical matter, cybersecurity technical matter, is compliance with FIPS 142, where it's applicable, an ongoing requirement that must be maintained?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it would be absolutely ludicrous to require something for certification and then say that as soon as you buy the system, you can do whatever you want with it. You can delete the encryption keys, you can do whatever you want with it. It's just, that's nonsensical.
I like how plainly this guy speaks. In the sense, it's like
Your Honor, I'm
just
trying to skip things we've
simple
already been
truth.
covered with Mr. Parikh. So give me just a second. I'm almost done.
It just makes it like this is just an obvious, simple truth. It's not very complicated. As complicated as you would think it.
You heard Mr. Parikh's
Could be.
testimony on how X509 certificates are used.
That's correct.
Any disagreement with the way he expressed it?
I would actually expand on it just a little bit.
Okay.
So, you know, the opportunity I've had to look at different systems across different states gives me a unique perspective of what that vulnerability could do. And so that 509 value is the same in every single Dominion system that I've looked at, regardless of version and regardless of jurisdiction. What that means is that if anyone with that certificate can get access to the same network address space, then they can remotely establish trust with that voting system, execute APIs or direct interaction with that system without really needing to know the user password for the Windows system. Okay, so I use the term address space because each of the Dominion EMS systems comes with pre-configured tunneling protocols and capabilities.
What are those?
So a tunneling capability, think of it as a VPN. If you've ever used a VPN to log into your office or somewhere else, you simply connect to a VPN and then you have the same IP address or the same IP address space as the network that you've VPN'd into. So in the case of the typical home network, that'd be a 192.168.1.1. Oh, I'm sorry. A 192.168.1.x network or address space. And so you could join that network and be a member of that network through those tunneling protocols. That is very easy to do.
It's always about the tunnels,
We do
Mr.
know
E.
in many jurisdictions that the routers that are procured as part of the Dominion voting systems are what they call managed switches, which means that you can program access control lists, you can program routes, and you can establish tunnels to those routers. So, you know, that is it's critical that with that 509 key, literally, if they have a tunnel, anyone anywhere in the world that has access to that address space could change the voting software. They could change the voting results. They could change any aspect of that voting system that they desired.
If they did that, would it be detectable?
Not given the current logging levels and the artifacts that they currently log. So the only way that you would detect that would be to analyze different machine address, they call them MAC addresses, okay? And those addresses can be spoofed, but generally they're not. But if you had a PCAP capture, which is basically as you transmit data over a network, those are in packets. And
caught up.
PCAP is a packet capture. If you have recorded those packets as they transmitted the network, then you may be able to determine whether or not somebody had unauthorized remote access. But given the current state of every system that I've looked at,
No
they
doubt.
simply do not record PCAP data, nor do they record the system process data that tells you exactly which processes were executed on the system. So short answer is, at the current state, no, that would not be discoverable.
Can Dominion remotely access these systems without detection?
Based on the emails that I have reviewed, yes.
I'll object on that basis that because we're relying on hearsay for that. Those aren't before the court.
All right, if you want to expand on the basis for his opinion.
What's
on that,
what's
Mr.
the
Goodwin.
basis for your statement?
Dominion produced a number of emails in response to subpoenas. A number of those emails have been released publicly by a sheriff by the name of Darleaf. And contained within those
That's gonna be a
emails
hearsay problem.
are specific conversations about them remotely accessing voting systems
That's gonna be a
during the
hearsay
course of an
problem.
election.
Well, apart from that, based on your understanding of the technical aspects of the systems, is that possible to
It is
remotely?
possible.
Remotely, okay.
If I was defense over here, I would have objected saying that's still hearsay.
We've heard reference to air gapping. How would you characterize the level of protection provided to the Georgia systems by the Georgia version of air gapping?
Well,
I'm not going to kid
Air
you.
gap
I'm
is a
still
technique.
confused.
but it's an easily bypassed technique.
What is
For
air
protection.
gapping? You guys know?
The US government has been bypassing air gap networks since the 70s. Okay. And the most common technique to bypass that is called island hopping. And basically, we know that the EMS servers typically have a wireless card installed on the motherboard. Even though they claim it's disabled, it's still there. If you bring in a hockey puck with an unencrypted signal, typically default on a Wi-Fi
That's what I assumed.
connect to these unprotected Wi-Fis. So all it would take is somebody with their cell phone in a hotspot mode, or bring in a little Verizon hockey puck, and you've once that EMS connects to it, or any of the other systems connects to that, you've bypassed the air gap network. It's very rudimentary. If you've got an actual active insider threat, it's child's play. If you have somebody who's inept and
But you don't know that
configuring
anyone inside is
system.
corrupt. Maybe everyone's
happens all the
fine.
time.
You don't know that.
So
That's the question a lawyer's going to
It
ask.
is
them.
a technique for protecting, but it can't be the technique because it's so easily bypassed.
All right, sir. And so if we assume that this system is vulnerable because of the encryption keys and the passwords, and the X509 certificates, as we've discussed, are the physical security measures that are supplemental to electronic cybersecurity, are they sufficient to protect the system?
And I'll object, Your Honor, on the grounds. I don't think there's foundation for Mr. Cotton's knowledge of the physical security measures that Mr. McDougal's question is referencing.
Well, as a general matter, as a cybersecurity professional, can you rely on physical security procedures in place
That begs the
of
question.
adequate
Actual,
protection of encryption keys and passwords?
And same objection. I believe we're talking about a specific set of physical security processes in Georgia that we haven't established he has knowledge of.
All right, so yeah, Mr. Dew, if you can tie it a little more closer to Georgia practice and procedures, I'd also say I think we've already covered this ground fairly adequately. And so I'd be wanting to know what additional
Okay.
insight he might offer here.
So as a general matter, are you familiar with the concept of physical security in the cybersecurity world?
Yes, and in the course of my support to election litigation, I have visited various
yeah, that's right. Will's mom.
election offices, shall we speak, although I have not visited Coffee County. But it's important to remember that the people who run our elections are not cybersecurity experts like myself and
Right.
Clay. In most cases, these EMS servers that I've viewed are simply running in the clerk's office. So while you may call it an air gap system, there's a question as to physical access on these systems. If they're simply exposed in a clerk's office and they're there 24/7.
As a cybersecurity professional, would you be willing to rely on physical security measures
That's a good way
as
to
the
frame it.
primary defense
That's a
of your
good way to frame
system,
it.
where it was as vulnerable as the Dominion system is, as we've discussed?
And Your Honor, same objection in terms of Georgia
doesn't know
specific
how
versus again,
vulnerable
assuming a
it
law
is.
without a foundation.
I'm asking as a general matter.
All right, well, I'll give you some leeway, Mr. McDougald. I think, again, we're getting a little astray of the core of your petition,
All right.
but we'll see where it goes.
Certainly physical security would be an aspect of it, but I would heavily focus on what happens when that first layer of defense breaks down, right? So if your defense on a system
Sweet.
is strictly one layer and that breaks down, then you really have no layers. We had a saying in the military that one is none, two is one. So in this particular case, if you're solely relying on physical security to ensure the protection of those encryption keys,
You have no
Then-
protection.
that's really not security at all.
So do you have familiarity with the physical security procedures in Georgia election processes?
I have been informed by the clerk from Coffee County what her procedures were. I am not familiar with the total statewide standard operating procedures.
All right, sir. Now, in the, there was testimony earlier that there are lots of different vulnerabilities for the election system.
That's a vulnerability in his
Can
testimony.
you
We don't know there's
assign
a
a
problem,
rank to the encryption
which
keys
is where the
and
lawyer's going to
password
hit.
vulnerabilities and X509 vulnerabilities that we've been discussing relative to the other known vulnerabilities? Can you rank it?
Well, in some ways, there are different classifications of vulnerability. So most of the vulnerabilities that we have talked about are really vulnerabilities to grant access to those systems that contain the unsecure keys. Okay. So the relationship between those two different categories is if you've got a vulnerability over here for access, then you've got the full vulnerability for the encryption keys in effect. I would say that if you're going to rank this, I agree with Mr. Fareek's assessment that the average home computer is better protected from a cybersecurity perspective than the EMSs that I have examined. And I'll take this kind of one step further. If I'm going to do an analogy between these vulnerabilities, you've taken a AES 256 encryption key, which is a very, very secure encryption technology, and you've neutered it. Okay. So if I put this into an analogy with banks, if you've got a bank vault, and that's the latest and greatest lock on that bank vault, and you tout that security on that bank vault, what they've done here is the equivalent of writing in big bold letters the combination on the wall next to the lock. Okay, so there really is no security if you can get access either remotely or physical access to those systems.
And as a incident response professional,
They wrote that in the
Uh,
petition.
would mitigating that be a high priority?
Absolutely.
What mitigation measures could be taken in the way of transparency to help mitigate this that wouldn't be overly burdensome to the counties or the state?
Your Honor, I'll just object here. I think overly burdensome to counties in the state assumes a level of knowledge this witness has not. There's no foundation for that. And I think this is very speculative, even for an expert on what he could offer.
All right. I think
All right, let me ask it this way.
I just say, I'll say sustain on those grounds. If you
All right, sir.
rephrase.
Would it be difficult to order the election officials to produce system logs,
He's gonna
cast
renew
vote
his
records,
objection.
and ballot images shortly after the election?
No, it would not.
Would that affect
Oh.
the user experience at all?
No, it would not. And furthermore, I would say that if you're really going to protect and mitigate during the time frame while they're fixing the database encryption issues, you would also want to
This morning, the expert witness
Enable-
hacked in.
PCAP captures of the network space so that you could definitively prove that nobody else remotely accessed those systems, and enable what's known as syslog logging of the actual processes and operating system to determine what programs and processes were ran during the course of that election. And both of those are very simple technologies and are not burdensome at all to implement.
All right, thank you, sir.
Take a break.
Unless there's any immediate need for a quick break, I'd like to try and see if we can power through it.
Oh
All
my
right, Mr.
gosh.
Tyson.
We're powering
Your Honor,
through.
Don't expect to take as long with Mr. Cotton. Good to see you again, Mr. Cotton. Let me start with Coffee County, because you reviewed data from Coffee County, the forensic images you described, right?
Yes,
And were you aware of the data collection happening in Coffee County before it occurred?
no, I was not.
And do you recall when you first were hired to review Coffee County's EMS and equipment?
That would have been the end of May, first part of June of 21.
And I believe you indicated you worked with Stephanie Lambert. Is that right?
That's correct.
And it was your understanding that Misty Hampton, the then elections director in Coffee County, was a client of Miss Lambert's. Is that right?
Yes,
You referenced a firm called Sullivan Strickler that you used, that you utilized to download those images. Do you know who Sullivan Strickler's client was in the Coffee County collection?
I do not.
And you've been involved in imaging election equipment in states other than Georgia, right?
Correct.
And that includes voting equipment in Michigan.
Yes.
Was that also working with Miss Lambert?
Yes, and part of that was also with Matt DePerno. Matt DePerno, I believe it's spelled DePerno.
You indicated you conducted a forensic examination of the Coffee County images. What do you mean by that term?
So forensics means I applied standard investigative practices that are technically accurate and repeatable. The term forensics means that you're gearing this towards admissibility into a legal environment. And so it must be able to be replicated and must be authenticated.
In your review of the Coffee County images, you didn't find any malware, did you?
I did not find malware.
Did you find any evidence of manipulation of votes on those systems?
To the extent that I've looked at this point, no.
And earlier, when you referenced you had spoken with the clerk in Coffee County, were you referring to Miss Hampton?
Yes,
And so you've spoken with her about her work in the Coffee County Elections Office?
yes,
And you're aware that Miss Hampton and others were criminally indicted related to allowing access to the Coffee County equipment, right?
I read about that in the newspaper, yes.
And I believe you said you've never been to Coffee County. Is that right?
No.
Let me ask you about some of the analysis you performed. You described some different ways that people could access systems. And one of the things you described was a similar pattern, I believe, of vulnerabilities in Dominion equipment in states other than Georgia. Is that right?
Yes,
And so a way to think about this is it's not unique to Georgia to have these encryption keys stored the way they are from your knowledge, every state that uses Dominion equipment has the exact same vulnerability, right?
Yes,
And so when you said Georgia's system, in your view, is not safe and secure, you'd agree that that applied to other states using Dominion equipment as well, right?
I would.
In terms of access to a system, you described some ways where if somebody had access, they could undertake various steps. Do you know, or have you reviewed in Georgia the rules surrounding the storage and maintenance of voting equipment?
I have not.
So you don't know exactly what someone would need to do to gain access to the Dominion equipment in Georgia, right?
Well, I mean, basic storage is basic storage, right? So if you have it secured, it's locked up somewhere in a closet. Somebody has a control key. However, Dominion systems have to be maintained. You can't let the batteries go down on the tabulators. You've got to keep them plugged in. You've got to keep them energized. So someone has to maintain them. So there is continual access during that time period in which they're stored. To the extent of who has access, I do not know. But from a basic principle perspective, if you secure something, people have access. They perform maintenance throughout the year.
You talked with Mr. McDougall about air gapping. You'd agree, though, air gapping is a security technique of some sort, right?
Yes.
And you discussed a scenario where someone could bring in a hockey puck to connect to Wi-Fi, various things like that. Has that ever occurred in any Georgia election, to your knowledge?
So here's what I will tell you is I have, as a course of my examination of Coffee County, that system was connected to the internet. Now, whether that was through a hockey puck or another routing mechanism, I simply haven't been able to determine what that is, but the artifacts on the system itself mean that it was connected to the internet.
And when you say connected to the internet, are you finding artifacts of network connectivity or specifically internet connectivity?
Internet connectivity, for example, I believe it's mail.live.com, where somebody checked their mail.
And was that on the EMS server or on another component?
That
of
was
the
on the
system?
EMS server.
And do you know if that connection of the EMS server to the internet would be a violation of any Georgia law or regulation?
I would assume that it would be, given what I know about the Georgia law.
You talked with Mr. McDougall about different risk mitigation strategies that are on the EAC website. Do you recall that?
I do.
And you'd agree that states may select different risk mitigation strategies based on things that are unique to those states, right?
Yes, however, at a certain point, there has to be a little bit of common sense involved in that risk analysis, right? So if you're saying that I'm going to assume a wide open barn door because I really like the looks of the lock when it's open, then obviously that's a failure of the analysis and the risk mitigation strategy.
Now, from your review, you'd agree that the encryption keys for each of the databases that you reviewed, while they're stored in plain text, were different for each county, right?
They were.
And as part of your analysis in this case, you've never reviewed the process Georgia uses to build election project files, right?
My understanding, that's controlled by the state. And that in itself may be a weakness from a security standpoint, because you have one office who is now constructing all of the project files, thus defining all of the passwords for every single county in Georgia. So there's a single point there where all of that information is in one point. So the fact that that is performed at state level in one location is actually a weakness rather than a strength.
Do you agree that it's better than having a vendor perform that function of building ballots?
I think that would depend probably on who at the state is doing it, and I don't know who's doing it. If you have the janitor doing it, then I wouldn't say that. But typically, I would agree with the statement that if you have competent people at the state level performing these functions, that are government employees, then that gives a larger fiduciary responsibility and assurance to the process.
And you haven't reviewed the process Georgia uses to deliver election project files from the state to counties, right?
No.
In response to some questions from Mr. McDougall, you propose some other changes you think need to be made to the Dominion system, PCAP captures, I believe, various things like that. Do you have any knowledge of whether making changes like that to the Dominion system would alter its current EAC certified status?
Well, the beauty of those changes would be, like for a PCAP capture, that would not involve the Dominion systems at all. That would simply be what's termed a tap off of the switch in a promiscuous mode, so that it would record all of that traffic. So there would be no impact to the certification status of Dominion at that particular point. The syslog enabling function is a setting in the registry. It would require a repository to be established external from the voting systems themselves, because you don't want to put the copies of the logs on the same place where you copy the logs from. That should not affect the certification status. But I find that argument a little bit interesting, because on one hand, you're saying you can't do a simple configuration change because it may affect the certification. But on the other hand, in my certification or in my analysis of the Coffee County voting system, there is a compiler on that system, and they have developed, modified, or created over 3,000 program executable files or device drivers on that system, and that did not affect the certification, apparently, of that system. So in my case, in my view of that, it's you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? You either allow changes within certain constraints or you don't. And in this case, changing a registry setting, making a configuration to take the logs off of those individual systems and centrally store those for future analysis is minor compared to creating program files, creating DLL files, which can actually change and modify the behavior of the system.
Boom.
So it's your belief that having those compilers is an additional vulnerability, but it's not something
not what he
related to
said.
EAC certification. Is
That's
that
not
right?
what he said.
So EAC
saying it's
certification
gonna mess with the
requires
system
a
more.
static program listing as it relates to the voting system. Okay. I'm going to leave legal opinions to the attorneys in this room. But what I will tell you is it's once again nonsensical to certify a system. And actually the Secretary of State's office called for essentially an audit after the 2020 election, in which they hired Pro V&V to come in and certify that nothing changed on those systems. And at the same time, have program files and DLL files that were modified and created related to Dominion Democracy Vote software paths, over 3,000 of them. So, in my opinion, if you change or if you add a program file or a device driver that's related to the voting software,
It's going to have more of an
that should
impact.
decertify the system.
So to make sure I'm clear on my question, then you believe that the existence of compilers should result in a loss of EA certification, but to your knowledge, the Dominion 5.5A system remains EAC certified. Is that right?
So my opinion is that if you use those compilers to create new executable files or to create new or modify the device drivers or those program files, that should result in a decertification of the system. Okay. Now, the problem is nobody checks. Okay. I know that when Pro V&V came into Georgia, they said no file had been changed. But they didn't check the entire directory paths of the Dominion voting system.
You gave an example of a bank vault and writing the combination and putting it on the door of the vaults. Do you recall that?
I do.
You'd agree that even if a bank undertook that, having locked doors on the outside of the building and having guards or staff present would at least provide an additional layer of security, right?
Well, it would provide a additional layer. Now, how effective that is, obviously the question. And,
Depends
if
who's doing the
I
garden.
relate to an old show, and I'm dating myself here. If you've got somebody guarding
Opie.
it, his name's Barney Fife,
All right, Fife. I knew it.
and
I knew he
he's
was
got
gonna do it.
one bullet, and he's asleep in the car, then that's really not protection. But it is a technique.
And you've obviously looked at some components of the Georgia election system. Do you have any evidence that anyone has ever manipulated votes in a Georgia election using any of the vulnerabilities that you've described in your testimony?
The challenge is you're not recording the right items or enough of the ones that you do record to make that determination.
So that would be you do not have evidence, correct?
Well, just as I would argue that you can't definitively prove that they didn't. There simply is no proof there because you don't have the necessary elements to analyze to determine whether or not prove or disprove that something happened.
So for whatever reason, you don't have whatever tools you feel you need to have. It's still true that you don't have any evidence of the manipulation of votes cast in a Georgia election, right?
Based on the forensics evidence, if you have no evidence or no artifacts to look at, then you're right.
Mr. Cotton, do you believe that Georgians can never know for sure whether Joe Biden won the 2020 election in Georgia?
Objection relevance.
Look,
He doesn't object though, McDougald.
I served my country for 21 years,
We appreciate that. Thank you.
and
No, you don't.
I abide by
Don't get this like stem.
the law of the land, and he is our certified president. Okay. This is not about rehashing the 2020 election.
Nice.
This is about restoring the confidence and faith of all Americans in the foundation of our democracy, which is
Nice.
the voting process.
Nice.
And if we can't prove or demonstrate to them that this process is secure and that we can detect if there is something going on, then I think that what we saw
Yep.
subsequent to the 2020 election is going to continue forward in the next foreseeable future with whoever lost bringing these up as issues
Republican or Democrat.
for the general public. And so I really look at this as more of a confidence issue and making sure that we as a collective government are doing the steps that we need to do to ensure the integrity of these elections.
Is it your testimony that if no
Great
changes
answer.
are made to the Dominion system from how it's currently configured, that Georgia voters cannot trust the results of the 2024 election that'll be happening in November here?
Yes.
Well, I'll go you one further. I mean, there's obviously going to be doubt. If no steps are taken to address the vulnerabilities and the integrity issues that are readily knowledgeable in the public, then there's going to be doubt. Okay. But I will go you one step further. In those emails that I have reviewed, the Dominion programmers themselves stated,
And I'll just object here to hearsay, Your Honor, for any further testimony on that. If I could have a moment, Your Honor.
There's something.
That's all the questions I have, Mr. Cotton.
There's an
Thank you.
aura about him which has
Redirect on
just
those points.
incredible credibility.
Just a couple, Your Honor. You mentioned the executable files.
yes,
Were those placed on the system, or were you able to tell whether those were placed on the system before or after certification?
they were placed on the system after EAC certification and after the installation and implementation of the Dominion software on the Coffee County EMS.
And does that raise any questions in your mind about whether the certification is still valid for that particular system?
Huge questions, huge questions.
Now, you mentioned a compiler. What does a compiler do?
So, you know, as experts, we are often accused of speaking very technically and
Yes,
above people's knowledge levels, right?
and you are guilty as charged.
I am guilty. So a compiler does the same thing for a computer, okay? So a computer only understands one language, zeros and ones, bits and bytes, okay? Now, as humans, we like to program in programming languages, okay? And it can be C++, it can be Cobalt, it can be Fortran, it can be, you know, Net++, you know, tick, 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 tick. What a compiler does is takes that human written code and turns it, you know, Net++, you know, tick, 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 tick. What a compiler does is takes that human written code and turns it into machine executable language so that the machine knows how to interpret it and run appropriately.
Is that compiler a necessary component of the ordinary functioning of the election system?
Well, here's what I will say. If the Dominion software requires changes to a program for an election cycle or requires the development of a new device driver, that clearly would be outside of what the scope of the certification examination was in the EAC. Now, whether it's required or not, that would be an EAC and a Dominion question, okay? Why do we have over 3,000 program files and device dynamic link libraries, which are device drivers, that were created or modified after you installed the software? Okay, and they all appeared to emanate from the Net++
Yeah, what do they do?
msbuild.exe compiler.
Which was also installed after the original installation.
No, that was installed before. So what's changed? So it appears that the Net++ msbuild.exe was installed as part, or that it was part of the golden image that was utilized to install the Dominion software when it was created, when they created the EMS. But what's different is that it was actually used. And it actually created over 3,000 executable files and .dll files after the fact.
That were not part of the system at certification.
Correct.
Can the compiler be used by a bad actor?
You have access to the machine, you have access to the compiler.
And what possibilities does that open up?
Well, you know, I spoke a little bit about the OPM breach. In that particular case, the piece of malware was actually a dynamic link library file, a DLL file, that was masquerading as a McAfee antivirus driver. And that created the entire access to the system, the exfiltration path. It created the entire vulnerability for that system. So when you're talking about malware, you're talking about unauthorized access, unauthorized exfiltration, those types of things. The creation of specific DLL files or executable files is quite common, which is why they should not be there after the certification piece.
All right, sir, that's all I have. Thank you.
Any recross?
Just one question, Your Honor. Mr. Cotton, just so I think we're all clear on this point, but it is your understanding that Dominion 5.5A is certified by the Election Assistance Commission, right?
I have seen the certification certificate.
So it is.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, can this witness be excused? Mr. McDougal?
Yes, he may, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You can step down. Any further witnesses or evidence, Mr. McDougal?
Subject to delivering the flash drives on the demos?
No.
No, and with that, I think I've tendered everything that we've identified and intended to put in, and they've been ruled on, so we would rest at this point, Your Honor.
All right.
All right, so finding that the applicant's case in chief is closed for now at this point, what I would say, Mr. Tyson, or how soon do you think you can get a copy of those flash drives to him, either remotely or physically?
Well, this evening electronically, tomorrow physically.
Okay, do you have a preference? Do you need them both, or just is remotely fine for you?
Remotely is fine.
All right, if any of you could just let us know in the next day or two, Mr. Tyson, if you've got them, if you have any further concerns.
Unless Dominion hacks it.
And then, should Mr. Tyson, I think we're going to call that a day for now. And should we reconvene? Did the secretary anticipate
Correct.
Presenting any evidence of their own or any witnesses?
Possibly, but before we do that, we'd like to both renew our motion to dismiss and
Right.
also make a motion for a directed verdict.
Right. And I'll get to that in just a second.
Okay.
I just kind of want to scope it out. If you say just generally kind of what that would look like, if you have a proffer generally of what that testimony would be, and just to kind of complete the roadmap for today.
So, Your Honor, I think if we end up putting on evidence, it would be probably a single witness from the Secretary's office just to speak about some of the internal processes for just, I know we had some different answers in terms of ballot building, delivery of information to counties, those types of things. I believe the SEB rules can be decided as law. I don't need testimony on those. So I think that would be the substance of what we'd be looking for a witness from the Secretary's office. So not very long.
Sure. Is there anything as it relates to encryption keys or their current status that you think would come in through that witness?
I don't believe so, Your Honor.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, Ms. Young,
So they don't
based
seem very
on
relevant then.
what you have heard in the case in chief, is there anything that you think needs updating in your arguments or that you want to highlight that what you learned today?
Well, in terms of a directed verdict, I'd kind of like to address why the evidence that you just heard is not sufficient to state a claim for mandamus. And I can do that this afternoon or.
I think we got a little time here, so.
Sure.
Do it. Give us your best, bitch.
I guess mainly what I was saying is obviously I'll incorporate all your arguments from the motion for the motion to dismiss. I'm more just curious what
there
now
anything
you would
new?
have in addition to that. That's
We
more
heard
so
your
what I was trying to
arguments. Do you have anything new?
press on.
No.
Well,
I just want to repeat myself.
so
please.
a couple of things to say if I can take the podium. I want to start from a big picture standpoint.
Do it,
because,
mailbox lady.
We've heard a lot of testimony about the flaws that the petitioner's experts believe are in the system. And even if you take all of that as true, and even if you don't hear testimony that we might put on about the guardrails that are put around the system,
Your guardrails suck because
that
anyone can hack it,
keep
idiot.
some of the parade of horribles ideas from happening. They look at 300 and they say, well, that can't mean what it seems, what they think it says.
What?
It can't simply be,
Oh,
go
the
buy a
statute,
system
300.
that's certified and certify the system and you don't have to do anything else ever again. And they're kind of right and they're kind of wrong. That is what it says. But
Nope.
it doesn't say that in a vacuum. And if you look at, there's a great law review article at 36 Georgia State University Law Review, page 86. I'm sorry, 81. 81. And it kind of goes through the history of HB 316, of which 21-2300 was a part. And the use of the BMDs at that time were very hotly debated. Sorry? BMDs. And while we didn't hear this exact argument about encryption keys, there were arguments made against the use of the system. And the law review article kind of goes through, the objections to that. And what came out of that was, okay, the majority wanted to have a BMD system, but they said, we're going to do certain things. You're going to buy a system that's certified. And then after that purchase, you're going to have risk limiting audits.
I'm going to pause for a second so you can appreciate the statute that they're about to be debating here, because this is in order for you to best understand what they're going to be debating. We should look at the statute, which is the basis of this application. It's 21-2300, which says that the state shall furnish a uniform system of electronic ballot markers and ballot scanners for use in each county as soon as possible. Such equipment shall be certified by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission prior to purchase, lease, or acquisition. The question is, does that mean that Raffensperger has to make sure it's being maintained that way, or can he just buy a system that complies, stick his head up his own rectum, and then say, "Well, I did what I'm supposed to do"? That's what she's arguing. That's what she's about to argue, and what the petitioner has basically said is scanners for use means it's got to be something that is actually being executed that way, not that you just buy it and stick your head in the sand. That's what they're about to be arguing about right here and now. With that, I think we can better understand. It's just this paragraph right here, which is Georgia law 21-2-300. That's what she's basically going to say. She's going to be making the argument. This is the argument she made this morning, basically saying, no, that's, as frustrating as it might feel for you, that's the law. He's allowed to buy it and then basically pretend that everything is fine because he did everything he's supposed to do. In the context of everything we just heard about how unsecure everything is, it doesn't sound like it's an argument which feels very compelling. But if he wants to be a coward, and frankly, we have seen Scott McAfee shy away from pulling the trigger when need be, he could, in theory, hide behind this as being like, that's technically true, and I'm powerless to do anything about it. I can only do what the statute says. So that's what these arguments are going to be about now.
And logic and accuracy testing. So when you look at 300, it's a starter statute. It tells the secretary, go buy a system that's certified. Then you look at it and you certify it yourself. And then from there, other statutes kick in terms of who's going to do what. You've got, if you go through the entire election code, lots and lots of statutes that talk about what happens after that. You have statutes that tell the county superintendents that they need to make storage plans and they need to appoint a person that's going to be in charge of making sure the storage is safe. You've got this whole very detailed description of the counties doing logic and accuracy testing before elections, and then a process for risk limiting audits after the elections. From that point forward, most of the responsibilities are placed on the county. The SEB is told to go, promulgate rules for recounts, and they narrowed the threshold for the recount by 0.5% to make it a little easier for somebody to meet that recount threshold. And so when you look at HB 316 and our election code as a whole, it makes sense that the secretary's obligations under 21-300 did stop at that point, because that's when other things kicked in. In terms of what we've heard today, we've heard a lot of things criticizing, whether or not the system should have been certified or should still be certified. The reality is it's certified. It's still certified. And under 21-300, what the secretary was to do was to purchase a certified system, which he did, and then certify the safety of that system, which he did. What should happen today could be a matter of debate. Should the EAC change its rules? Should they do something? Those are interesting points to debate, but that's not a proper case for mandamus.
This woman should go after
You also heard Mr. Cotton or Dr. Cotton, I can't remember, admit that the EAC certification is static. That was a very clear admission that, he acknowledged that certification is static. Now,
He's not an
they
expert on
have
the law.
raised,
He doesn't know.
lots of arguments about why maybe it shouldn't be, or whatever, but EAC isn't here. They're not a party to the case. We've also heard about physical security not being enough. Well, the legislature thought that it was. And the people responsible for ensuring that, some of these things that we heard about, election workers not properly watching their spaces, those election superintendents aren't here either. And those are their duties under the code. So when you look at mandamus, nothing that we have heard here today points to a clear legal duty placed on the secretary that has been breached. In terms of laches, you heard
Latches.
testimony that
ignorant
people have been
goblin.
aware of this issue for quite some time, depending on which witness you're talking to, but even, the plaintiffs.
Isn't there really only one witness that matters though? And that'd be
I'm sorry?
Ms. McCarthy. Wouldn't it really only be one witness that matters on that issue though? And it's the
True,
knowledge
but
of the applicant.
and she testified that she's a cybersecurity expert, and that she read the Halterman report when it came out. And the standard for what puts you on notice of bringing a claim isn't having an aha moment. It's having some knowledge that there's an issue and picking up your duty to investigate further. If
Oh,
you
she
look
said
at the
lunches? Is that what
cases
she
talk
said,
about
lunches?
Factors of laches. The ones that apply here are okay. Well, you start with how long is the delay, and then you look at what's the excuse for the delay. And, you heard these experts say they began working on declarations months ago without having a plaintiff, apparently. Apparently, it was just a matter of time until they found one. But, between there not being a really good excuse for that delay, and then the final factor being, what's the prejudice? The prejudice is we're starting early voting in about 2 weeks. This is not the time to be reevaluating the state's entire system.
No, of course it is. Of course it
the
is, you stupid
legislature
bitch.
had a very clear plan with HB 316, and they thought a lot about the steps in that plan. And the secretary did the things the legislature told him to do. The county elections workers picked up the ball from there, and that from that point forward, it was a group effort between the secretary and the elections workers to do all of these things that the legislature
I agree with
sat
you,
down and
Audacity.
sort of brainstormed
That would
out
defeat this
to
argument.
try to help find a brand new system for our state, and then take it from there to make sure it was securely stored, maintained, and properly checked before and after every election. There's just simply no cause of action stated for mandamus, and so we think, even with what you've heard here today, directed verdict would be appropriate.
Even
All right,
with,
thanks,
because you
Sam.
know how awful it
Sam, too.
sounds.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Insane bitch. You don't give a damn about having a.
So the fundamental legal question, I think, presented by the motion to dismiss and the motion for directed verdict is whether there is a duty to have of an ongoing compliance with the certification requirements. They say there isn't. We say there is. And we rely primarily on 21-2-300 subsections A2 and A3. And their
Yes,
argument
please.
relies on a very narrow reading of the language in A3 that it shall be certified by the EAC prior to purchase, lease, or acquisition. And we've checked that box, and that's all we have to do. But that interpretation does not square with subsection A2, which requires that the secretary certify as safe and practicable for use. Now, that certification by the secretary, it is made prior to purchase. So that's relevant to the statutory analysis. But what is the purpose? What is the purpose of that certification? What is the purpose of the EAC certification?
Why have them certified?
What is the purpose of the deliberations by the legislature that council was referred to about how to have a secure election? Well, the purpose is to have secure elections on secure systems.
It's
Voter
obvious.
verifiable. Why do they
child
store the machines
understands
in
this.
locked rooms? Why do they put sealing tape
Why?
over the machines and the cases they're in? Why do they do all of those things? Why have any physical security procedures in an
Why
election?
have a damn
Why have any
election?
chain of custody procedures in elections? The entire structure of the election code in Georgia and the regulations that the secretary of the state election board has promulgated is to promote election integrity and give the public faith and confidence in the result and have an auditable trail so that people can trust the outcome. So this is important. And Mr. Cotton talked about this. We're evolving into a situation of zero trust in the elections. There was a big discord in our country over the 2016 election and whether it was hacked by the Russians. There was huge discord in our country over the 2020 election. And people are losing faith and confidence, and that creates a fragile situation. And we need a stable situation. We need, in a zero trust environment, we have to have verifiable steps and documentation and proof so that it doesn't require trust. It can be verified independently. Habit
So-
requires auditability.
Your interpretation of the statute, the certification, this is
Yeah.
not, this isn't a one-time deal. That's your interpretation of this.
Right.
Is that this is a,
Ongoing requirement.
and how often, and something that can be revisited at any point.
So
The secretary could uncertified at any point.
There
according
is-
to the statute.
yes, there is a provision, and I can't recall the code section, I'll get it to the court, I'll file a supplemental brief, that permits a petition to be filed with the secretary. It's either competing vendors or a certain number of electors. I think the number is 17 electors, and they can petition for the secretary to revisit the question of certification. So that's a specific way to invoke a duty to re-examine the question. But in this case, we have the Haldeman report, which documents the encryption key vulnerability and many other vulnerabilities being delivered to the secretary in July of 21. Wasn't made public until June of 23. I think earlier I said July, and apparently that was wrong. So what has the Secretary of State done in response to that?
Jack Zippo.
Nothing.
Yeah.
In March of this year,
He did his job because in 2019 he bought the
Greek-
system.
the Cotton affidavit, in another case, apparently came to the Secretary's attention. And they reached out through the Secretary's General Counsel to inquire about that. And that affidavit was made available to the Secretary's General Counsel. And the gist of that
DMA.
affidavit is
At the
very
Fallen
close to
Crow.
the affidavit
Nice.
we submitted from him as an attachment to our application and to the testimony you heard from Mr. Cotton and Mr. Parikh. So the entire problem was laid before the Secretary in, I think, late March of this year. And what did the
Jack
Secretary do?
Zippo happened.
He did nothing.
Yep.
And so we are here asking for mandamus relief to
Because
compel
he's
the
such a
Secretary to
complete
do
jackass.
what he will not do himself.
Yeah. We were hoping he'd take care of
And
himself.
The
That he wouldn't be a
so
douchebag
in-
moron
interpretation of the statute,
who
we
looks
say
completely
it would be
corrupt.
absurd to interpret it as the Secretary's counsel urges, because then it would be nothing more than security theater.
Yeah.
It would create the illusion of security, not the reality of security. And we cannot impute to the legislature the intent to simply create illusions. They wanted to create
That's
the
a great point.
reality
Yes.
of
great
election
point.
security, as illustrated by the entire body of law in the election code regulating very, very minutely the procedures for carrying out elections. The Secretary, his own self, took the position in the purchase contract with Dominion that the system must maintain compliance.
Why did he do that?
So which is it? Are they supposed to maintain compliance as the contract provides? Or is it in the rearview mirror and it doesn't matter?
It's an admission from him
Uh,
that there's an obligation for that to continue.
So the mandamus code sections,
he didn't slow down. I just caught up to him.
9-6-20, provides that, and in our brief, I quoted this language and I said it was 9-6-21. I was wrong. It's 9-6-20. It says that there's a mandamus provides a remedy for improper performance.
And on highlighting improper performance.
Yeah.
I think the most common application as we see is do something, not that, you've done it wrong. Any particular cases stand out where the Supreme Court
Not
said
on
you
the
did it
re-
wrong instead of do something?
Not on the remedy of compelling due performance. So that language in 9-6-20 remedy for improper performance and
Right.
compel due performance. So we think that it's a mandatory duty that the system comply with the EAC certifications and that responsibility.
And I'm not just saying,
Right.
not just confined to the
Yeah.
world of election law, just are there any mandamus cases that you came across where they said, yes, that performance was improper and here's the court stepping in to say that it was improper? Or are they all just kind of mostly the complete absence of any action?
Well, the other statute, 9621, it does say that there's a remedy for the, normally it lies only for ministerial duties. But it's also black letter law that mandamus will lie for discretionary duties if there's been an abuse of discretion. And so if it's not construed as a mandatory duty, which we think it is, because it either complies with certification or it doesn't. And as we sit here today, it does not. And, does
We all
would
know
the
it doesn't.
Secretary today, in light of this evidence, certify this system safe and practicable for use?
If
I
so,
hope
he's
not.
an ass clown,
I attribute to the Secretary good intentions to have a secure system.
which sounds naive.
It's baffling that they have not reacted to the compelling
It is.
evidence that's been in his hands.
Mr.
for 3
Diddley
years
Squat.
about this problem. So mandamus, that's the remedy. It's available to us and we are resorting to it. So the abuse of discretion, let me put it this way. He doesn't have discretion to field a system that has open text encryption keys that any moderately sophisticated attacker could exploit to alter election results without detection. He doesn't have that discretion. Where's the statute that says that? And they get there, that's the effect of the argument. They get there by saying, well, all we got to do is have a pre-purchase certification, then it doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. It has to matter. The only context in which it could matter is the operational context. The whole point is to have a safe election, not to pass a test. Why did the legislature require the test? So they would have a safe system in elections. I mean, it's nonsense to construe this as there being no duty to have a compliant and safe operational election system. That's the thrust of the entire thing. So I think I have not read that article, but I will go out on a limb and say that an overwhelming concern was election integrity. The commission that was convened by the secretary was called the Safe Commission. It wasn't the unsafe commission, it was the Safe Commission. Why? Because they wanted a safe system. And if those people had known that these encryption keys were in plain text, that you had hard-coded vendor passwords going back to 2008 or 2010, that you had 10-year X509 certificates that could establish trust between communicating machines, they wouldn't have gotten off the ground. Now, we have an argument that's been made that I will paraphrase by saying there's so many different security problems on this system that it doesn't really matter that the encryption keys are in plain text. He did not say that. I'm characterizing it. But the line of cross-examination was, well, there are a lot of problems here, and this is just one of them. And why should we focus on this one compared to the other ones? And the reason is because it is an extreme vulnerability, and it's been proven in this courtroom that they can be exploited to decrypt passwords with administrative privileges. It's been proven in this courtroom that they can be used to alter election results. Those are critical vulnerabilities, and they're not being addressed. And I'm sad to say that the Secretary of State's office is resisting doing anything to correct them. There was another sort of insinuation. That it's the same all over the place. Well, that's like the everybody does it defense. We're talking questions, does it comply with the statute? Yes or no? And it doesn't matter what everybody else does. It either complies or it doesn't. And it does not comply, and there's no evidence that it complies.
Every one of us in this room understands what a joke our election system is. Are you going to do something or not?
Latches. The actual test is gross latches. No illumination was provided on the subject of gross latches.
Latches
The
means
earliest
delay in bringing the
that,
action.
Ms.
That they
so Ms.
sat
McCarthy
around too
reads the
long
Alderman
when they knew of the
report back
problem
in
and didn't do
23.
anything. That's what
That
latches
is
is. And it's a reason to
uh,
reject
June of
the-
23.
the application.
We're talking 14 months. Latches can be sometimes analyzed in comparison to applicable statutes of limitation. It's not in every context, but that is one way to sort of figure out where you are in the world of sleeping on your claims. There's no particular statute of limitations on this. The public and the plaintiff were entitled to assume that the secretary would perform his duty. Just, and I cited this in the brief, but it's the case about the recording the lease. So, oh, well, you knew in 2003. Well, and I was at pains to point out, we got encryption key vulnerability is one part of it. The certification aspect of that problem is the other. And it's fair to say that Halderman talked about encryption keys vulnerability in July 21. He did not talk about certification. He did not put it in the context of certification. That report was such a hot potato, it was put under seal. Went up to CISA, which is the Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency. And it's all, so they got security in there twice. Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency. And they took about, well, Mr. Tyson would know better than me, but I'm gonna say approximately a year to review that. They issued a bulletin recommending mitigating measures, adaptations. There were 8 of them. They didn't mention encryption keys at all. And the secretary
All right,
from
bring it home, buddy.
2001 forward has not taken any action to mitigate the encryption keys problem. But the latches argument presumes that Ms. McCarthy should have known more and better than they did once she read it in 2023 and come immediately to court. That's inverted. They're the ones that have the affirmative legal duty. And she's entitled to rely on them performing their affirmative legal duties correctly. It does not fall on her. And so I think that's inverted, and I think they have unclean hands charging her with latches. And in terms, there's no evidence of gross latches, no evidence that she laid around and tried to spring it on them. The issue was presented by Mr. Olson.
I want to just explain the legal terms he's using here that you might not realize even are legal terms. So latches means delay. If you delay too long and it harms the other side by your delay, so that's a notion to say that whatever relief you're seeking should be rejected. Okay, it's considered like an equitable defense. It's inequitable for you to sit around on your tuchus the entire time, and now you're going to come the last second, or when it's harming me and it's making my life really difficult, and say I need my relief now. So we'll say, even though it's not beyond statute of limitations, but it's just inequitable. That's so when you talk about like, it's just unfair. Right? When we say inequitable, it's just an unfair thing for you to do. And that's a reason to deny relief, which is one of the bases that the Raffensperger's counsel has brought forward. He referenced just now unclean hands. That's a way of knocking off latches, saying like, don't come to me and say that you're entitled to some sort of fairness because you yourself have what we call in the law unclean hands. You yourself acted inappropriately. So now don't start saying now you're harmed by the way I acted because you have unclean hands. So both of them are basically arguments not based on the statute or based on written law, but as far as just notions of fairness that are woven into the law. So there's latches is what the defense is saying. He's like, you can't raise latches because you have unclean hands. You yourself acted inappropriately. So that's the arguments that he's basically trying to, one basis he's trying to knock off the latches issue.
To the Secretary's General Counsel back in March of this year, and still they did nothing. We have asked for relief in the form of an order to compel them to bring the system in compliance with the certification requirements. They did not make the argument that that was impossible or infeasible for 2024. That argument has not been made. Maybe they'll make it in their case if we get there. But they have not made that argument. But what if it is? What if it is? Well, is that the same thing true for future elections after that? 25, 26, 28? I should think not. And if it is, presents a practical problem for them to bring these systems in compliance in time for 2024, we've asked for what we call in the complaint interim and mitigating relief in the form of transparency measures. And I would say, to be fair about it, that our witnesses describe some additional things that could or should be done that we didn't identify in our pleading. And all of that would be good, not just what we asked for in the pleading, but specifically the things that Mr. Cotton described. Those are not big burdens on election officials. The system, we got PCAP devices,
basic.
those are not part of the Dominion system. That's not maintained by Dominion, but the logging can be, they can change what gets logged. They can produce system logs that's maintained normally. They can produce ballot images. Those are part of the process, and they can produce the cast vote record. Those are all already there. Just give them to us.
That was
That
actually
will
statute
be-
of limitations.
It's not going to be perfect,
Which that's
not gonna
stronger.
solve
It's a
the problem
statutory
entirely,
claim,
but
not
it
just
will mitigate
unfairness,
the
which is
problem that
murky,
we have.
but
That's an
law,
urgent
which is
problem that
more
needs to be addressed and needs to be
bright
fixed.
line.
And
then
the
they change the
fact
law.
that if those mitigation measures are applied, it will serve as a deterrent, because a bad actor will know that more scrutiny is being
Yep.
applied. And that will have a beneficial effect. And these transparency measures will bring additional confidence to the public. Why did we bring this case? Because we want this problem fixed. And if the secretary had fixed it himself, we wouldn't have had to file it.
There's no
Thank
T
you.
in
May I
latches, by the
Just a
way.
minute.
briefly word just on that last point about remedies. We've had both
Those
shifting
hobgoblin.
legal theories. They started saying it was ministerial, and now they're saying it's discretionary, but of course abuse of discretion. But what I haven't heard is a really cogent and clear expression of what the remedy should be. He says, well, you should just order them to bring it into compliance.
I'll just take it. I think there's quite a few things laid out in the petition, so that's what I'm using as my
Well,
kind of point of reference.
So there you go. So sit down.
I'd like to
Sit
ask
down,
before you enter any
hobgoblin.
kind of an order to consider what that would actually mean, because I'm certainly not sure what that would mean. In 2 weeks, what is it that they're asking the secretary to actually do?
Not 2 weeks.
Is it fix the system or throw out the system? And
And I see these more, Ms. Young, as those, that'd be a discussion we'd have if they get past your directed verdict. So,
Well,
I don't see that as.
but it does wrap into the directed verdict analysis, because if you can't simply order somebody to do their duty under a statute, then it's not a proper mandamus.
No,
case.
it's very
I
simple.
will remind you that in terms of relief post-election, we do have a fully litigated case pending in the Northern District, which
No one
kind of
gives
tells you
a
that there are adequate legal remedies out there, where many of these issues may end up being
She's not an
decided in
idiot.
that
She's
form.
corrupt.
But if the suggestion is that the secretary should
Or
just,
she's not
simply
corrupt.
order
She's
the
defending
counties to
corruption.
toss out all the machines, that would be a violation of a number of legal duties that
No one
expressly
said
were
that,
placed upon
bitch.
the secretary and the county election
They said just log
superintendents by
what's
the
happening.
legislature. So the
So I don't know why you're
the
confused
remedy,
by it.
I think, really illustrates why mandamus is not the right place for us to be right now. Thanks.
I think the reason she's trying to play stupid is because she figures it's something she can sell easily. I
All
don't
right,
know
thank you,
what
Ms.
relief
Young.
they want.
All right, so
Gosh, I'm getting
I know I'd
aggravated
initially
by someone.
indicated that we would reconvene Wednesday, but I think kind of in light of some of the other things that Ms. Young has brought up and some of the other cases that are active this week, I think her presence and attention will be needed elsewhere. And so also just with our own conflicts here on this docket, I don't think we'd be able to come back this week. So I think next week would be the earliest. I recognize kind of the time sensitive nature of the decision here.
Very
so my
time sensitive.
intention is to have a decision for you on the directed verdict by the end of the week, which I'll just file by written order on the docket. And depending on the results of that, if we need to come back and reschedule something, I'll start working logistics with the parties from there. I think that's all I've got.
On scheduling.
Yes, sir.
And I confess, I do not have a leave of absence filed in this case, but I'm going to Europe between the 10th and the 23rd with my wife, and
Oh,
We'll just reconvene in Paris. All right.
and they do have Zoom from there. So
Understood. Well, we can work that out through
Yeah.
email. Anything
Thank
else we
you.
need to have today?
no, other than thank you very much.
I guess that's it. Well, if you stuck with me you saw this morning or really even this afternoon, you saw either half of this testimony. What you saw is that Georgia's election system is basically something that my 9-year-old could probably hack into. No, I need to withdraw that. I apologize. She's 10 now. So yeah, that they can hack into, easily get the password and change the algorithm, change the outcome of elections. And Raffensperger is pretty much doesn't give the slightest damn. But he's going to tell you that we had the most secure election in world history. Son of a bitch. Yeah. Yeah. And then the Democrats would be like, and he's a Republican. He's a Republican. Why are you complaining? He's a Republican. Brian Kemp. Yeah. These neocons. Neocons are worse than Democrats. They are. They're worse than Democrats. Anyhow, so yeah, at a certain point in time, when you're defending your crappy system as being state of the art, and you're clearly aware. He's been aware. I can pull up here the petition, the underlying petition, which was the basis of this. I've actually spent a great deal of time going through it and marking it up, just so I can be able to do it quickly. And I mean, it's crystal clear. It's right over here. It's crystal clear. They knew about this whole problem. They go through what the Georgia law is. It's left in an unprotected state, readable to anyone. That the Secretary of State has been on notice of this violation since at least March of 2024. And here's the evidence. Where you have in dark green here is stuff that's evidence that they have, that because he himself, the attorney himself, informed the Secretary of State's counsel, Charlene McGowan, on March 28th, saying, hey, you got problems here. And their failure to enforce this mandatory requirement and the election system be EAC's compliant has compromised all passwords administrative level controls on Georgia's election. The data has been lawfully published online. You can find the data, meaning the encryption key. You can get it online. You can get it right now. It's unbelievable. The administrator and technician's passwords are also accessible to the public. The Secretary of State's failure to enforce mandatory security requirements for encryption keys has compromised Georgia's election systems and left them vulnerable to any malicious actor, foreign or domestic. It could be someone in Russia, it could be someone in China, it could be someone sitting in Fulton County, to manipulate the election results without likely detection. It's very easily, there's no footprints. The relief that they're seeking is forced. You don't have to get rid of the whole system. You're not going to be able to change this out between now and November. We understand that. Simply just put in basic coding, which means that anyone who does anything to this would leave a footprint. Just logging who is doing what to that system each step along the way. It's not a very big ask. I am a little concerned, not going to kid you, that he said that he's going to issue a decision on directed verdict by the end of the week. That sounds like it's a lengthy, it's a little concerning. He could have just denied directed verdict here and now. So I'm a little bothered that he didn't just deny that application right now. That leaves me a little concerned that her technical we can skimp out of this because we're not technically under the statute bound by this, despite what a ridiculous read it is of the statute. The plain wording is unfortunately more consistent with what she's asking for, but the plain reading is rather simplistic, because then there's really no point to it. There's no point to saying you have to set things up and then we're just going to let everything go on autopilot and never worry about whether or not the system becomes garbage 10 minutes after you buy it, which is just, it doesn't make any sense. So we will find out by the end of the week what the story is. I am going to give you all a heads up. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing tonight with respect to my regular show. I do need to work on my Ungag Trump application, because we're looking to get emergency relief before a Supreme Court. You can find out more about that at gibsongo.com/Ungag Trump, where we're going to be making an emergency application to try and get into SCOTUS this term and have our application heard beforehand. My attorney has presented to me a third draft of the application, which I've not had an opportunity to review. He sent the last version out late last night. So I've not had an opportunity to review that yet. I do plan on reviewing it. I'm probably going to end up editing it tonight. It's probably going to be a work stream tonight, where instead of a regular stream, I'll be clacking away here to get that done, because we need to get this in. He told me tomorrow. So I'm probably going to be working on that tonight. And when I'm working on it tonight, I'll probably end up live streaming my work on it. So you'll end up sitting there watching me just sort of like be clack away, but not on this document, but on the actual document that was prepared by the attorney for Good Lawgic LLC, who serves as not my personal counsel, but as counsel for my LLC. Anyway, that's the story. I will try to keep you all updated on further developments on this case. If this comes back with further testimony next week, I expect to live stream that for you all next week. I hope you enjoyed this, and sign up. Please, if you're here, like, subscribe, drop comments. Tell me how you think it went, what your thoughts are. Do you trust our elections? Do you? Do you trust? You think it's just Georgia? You think it's just Georgia? You think we have to worry about this all over the place? It's a little scary. Anyway, I appreciate you coming in here. Please like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. Leave a comment. And you like when beautiful. All right. So maybe we'll have a whole. We'll all be working together. Let me do a quick check over here. Make sure I didn't miss anything in Rumble. I think I'm good here. I think I'm good in Rumble. Oh wait, no, I did miss. Ripka the Jade Gamer says, "How far in advance do you need to assume that an office holder won't do a job? How can latches apply to a mandamus? They waited too long to notice that he wasn't going to address their concerns." Apparently, that's what the claim is. That's what the claim is. Yeah, it's pretty stupid, but like I said, she sells stupid. She sells stupid pretty easily. She's got like that nailed down. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. I hope to see you later tonight. Till then, take care of yourselves. Watch out for families. Don't eat any of those bugs, and Godspeed.